Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, January 10th, 2017 meeting of the Long Meadow School Committee. This meeting is called to order. Our meeting is being recorded and aired live by LCTV. It is also being live streamed on longmeadow.org. It is a legal requirement for anyone else to disclose if they are recording this meeting. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For correspondence this week, we have a letter recorded from Michael Clark received on December 15, 2016 in support of John Fitzgerald's resolution opposing the nominee Betsy DeVos for Education Secretary. We also received a memo from Mr. Donald Jarvis of the Lower Pioneer Valley Career and Technical Education Center dated December 28, 2016, regarding the Student of the Month Awards for December 2016. The Long Meadow students honored this month are Joseph McDonald for Building Property Management, Samantha Mustaine for Culinary Arts 1, Ashley Matthews for Graphic Communications 2, and Austin Munson for Integrated Occupational Prep. Next on our agenda, we have approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion?
I move on this, that the school committee approve the minutes of the November 29th, 2016 school committee meeting as presented.
Anything on those minutes before we vote?
On these I did.
Russ?
So,
Well, I had a question, if I could.
go ahead.
Under number 3, when we come back into open session, my name's not listed, but I was here. I am listed above, under the call to order. Okay?
Okay, Russ?
So, on the piece, under new business, under discussion of resolution.
Which, oh, you're in the front,
So, on the second, the next page there, kind of where I started speaking. Basically, the point, I think I did say something about the politics, but my main point was I wasn't voting for the resolution because I don't think it's necessarily the committee's role. That was the gist of it. So I think that would more accurately reflect what I was trying to get across.
Okay, anything else? All those in favor of the minutes? Yeah, you're absent. Opposed, abstaining, is Liz is the only one abstaining. We need a motion for the December 13th minutes.
I move the school committee approve the minutes of December 13th, 2016 school committee as presented.
Second. Any questions or discussion?
It doesn't say what the resolution was. Shouldn't that have been part of the minutes? I mean, if you're reading these minutes, you don't know what we're talking about.
What if we attached your resolution to it? The whole resolution?
I think that would make sense.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Anything else on the December 13th minutes? All those in favor? Thank you. Do we have any visitor comments tonight? We'll move on to school committee and Russ.
Could I just make one comment about, so the letter from Michael, Do you plan on putting that on a future agenda to ask that we revisit the resolution?
So the resolution is, well, it was going to be on the next agenda, but my understanding is that they're voting before our next meeting in 2 weeks. Is that right, John?
Our hearing is tomorrow.
The hearing is tomorrow. Yeah. So I guess sort of anything would have been late at this point after not having success in passing it at the last meeting, unfortunately.
Well, so what I was going to, I guess if Michael was here today, as somebody that was willing, that voted against it, I was willing to, you need somebody that voted against it to reopen the conversation, which I was willing to do because I thought the will of the committee would have been 4-3. So I wouldn't want to make a practice of doing that, just, if somebody's absent, they're absent and they don't get to vote. In this case, I would have made an exception, but we have the same situation today, so I'm not going to do that, but, because the vote would be the same. But if he had been here, I was willing to do it, because I think the will of the committee would have been 4-3 on that issue.
Yeah.
No.
Did you want to say anything else, John, on that?
Well, why don't we see what happens?
Yeah, why don't we do that?
We're talking 2 weeks out,
Yeah, 2 weeks, yep.
so if
Yeah.
any development, I'll let you know.
You'll let me know.
I did send a letter under my own signature
I'm glad.
to both Warren and Markey,
Okay.
but I haven't heard yet, whereas someone else sent a letter and got a response. So, I don't know, do you want to talk about it? Or-
Oh, I just sent it letting people know where Markey stood on the issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apparently, both are opposed to her nomination and have some critical questions.
Good.
And they've got some reasoning behind their position.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
There's been a lot more out there in the news since our last meeting. It's been interesting watching, for sure. Okay, any other school committee announcements or recognitions tonight? Okay. Our town manager will be joining us shortly. Stephen Crane is coming to give a presentation on the DPW facility. I think he's a little bit delayed, so we will move on. And then we also have a presentation from another guest. Since those guests have not arrived yet, we'll move on to the administrative reports. First on the list is the superintendent's report.
Sure.
You have a copy of your report?
I do, somewhere here. So there is a written report in your packet, and the first item in that was that we've initiated the search for Ms. Pratt's replacement at Blueberry Hill Elementary School, so we're excited to find a successor to Ms. Pratt. Obviously, significant shoes to fill for us. The position has been posted. I've reached out to the PTO to assist us with identifying some two PTO parents that could be on that committee. We also will have one parent from our school council that will serve on that screening committee. 3 to 4 staff members, 3 to 4 teachers, 2 staff members will also be included in the screening committee, and we'll have representation from the district administrative team and from, there'll be 2 school principals as well. So on the back of the report is the timeline, the tentative schedule associated with that search. So we go from today, when the position was posted, to the middle of March, when we hope to bring a candidate to the school committee. So it's a lengthy process, it's a thorough process. I'm confident that we can put together a screening committee that is representative of the entire Blueberry community. I'm confident that we'll have a great applicant pool. It's obviously an attractive school in an attractive community, so we're anticipating that we'll get some great applicants. We'll be thorough in the process. The screening committee will obviously engage in paper screening of applicants, an interview process. There'll be opportunities for the candidates the finalists to visit Long Meadow. We will be sure to make our way to the schools of the finalists as well. So I think there'll be a thorough vetting, and I'm really hopeful that we can bring forward a great successor to Ms. Pratt. Again, big shoes to fill, but I visited the Blueberry staff meeting the other day, and they were very interested and seemed to be engaged in the process, and I think we'll get some interest from the staff as well. So would like to have a school committee representative on that screening committee. So if one of you would be interested, if you could email Diane by the end of the week to let us know. And if there's more than one of you that are interested, then, you know, I'll work with the chair to figure out how we might identify one school committee member for that.
Should we just do that right now?
If it's clear and obvious, we could do that, or, you know. So we need one school committee member to sit on the screening committee. The dates associated with the search are on the back of my report. My hope would be that whoever signs on can make a commitment to those dates. I wouldn't say they're locked in stone, but, you know, we'd put the dates out intentionally so that anybody who was interested could line up their schedule or check with their schedule to see if it was possible. So it's, you know, 4 or 5 meetings, and then also some site visits on top of that. So it's a significant commitment, but I would appreciate if one school committee member could join us in that search. So,
I'm definitely interested. I don't know if anyone else is interested in serving on that search committee.
I would be interested, but I think, based on the dates, I think I'd have a hard time making that many afternoon meetings. So I think it makes sense to probably do it.
I'm not available for all the dates, so I think.
all right.
Yeah, so my only concern that I mentioned to Marty was those February dates might be a little tough. The 8th and 9th, I think.
Yeah, so that was sort of an organizational meeting and an opportunity to maybe do some paper screening with,
Yeah.
of the candidates. And so it's possible that we could conduct some of that business sort of virtually online, or perhaps screening committee members could come into the district office to go through the application pile. So
Okay.
if there, you know, of all the dates on this schedule, the 2 that are flexible would be February 8 and 9, I would say.
Okay.
So I think we could work with you on that. It is a commitment, I recognize that. And
Yeah, because we have a public forum scheduled for Tuesday, February 7th, and then we still, as a committee, would need to decide whether we were gonna vote on the budget that night, because we have a tentative meeting scheduled for February 9th. But, you know, a lot of it depends on how the budgeting process goes, so.
So that's great.
All right.
I appreciate that. And
Okay.
we'll be in touch.
Thanks for putting that together.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
So beyond that, statements of interests are being prepared. We're confident that we will have those ready to go for your tentatively scheduled special meeting on Thursday, January 19th. That was to be an afternoon meeting, simply to consider the finalized SOIs. So we had, again, tentatively scheduled that for Thursday, January 19th, I think at 3 p.m., and that would be the only agenda item at that meeting. We would simply need a quorum to properly consider the SOIs.
3 p.m. on the 19th.
3 p.m. on the 19th, Diane, do I have that right? Is that, yeah. So, hoping that that's a go, and then we have another informational session lined up for tomorrow at Center School at 9 in the morning. And so hopefully we can get the word out through that session. And then even after we prepare the SOIs, I think we'd still want to continue with our outreach to the community. So, anything on the SOIs at all for the middle schools? If you could move it on, March 30th, 2017, hoping you can mark your calendars for the semi-annual Technology and Education Showcase. It's an opportunity for teachers and staff to showcase projects, classroom projects that are rich in technology and a lot of exciting things happening. Sandy Boudreau is coordinating that event for us. We appreciate her efforts. And that's March 30th, 2017. I also wanted you to be aware that...
March 30th, sorry, Marty.
March 30th, yeah.
March 30th.
March 30th, yeah.
What time is that? Is that?
It's from 6 to 8, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.
At
So
the high
it-
school?
Yeah, so it's sort of, it can be a drop-in type of event if you can't stay the full 2 hours. And
That's a Thursday night.
that's a Thursday night, I believe. And then also wanted you to be aware that we will be in full compliance with a new Public Records and Freedom of Information Act. I have sort of self-designated myself as our records access officer for the district, and so we've done that, made that designation, and then posted information to our website so that anyone who is looking for public records associated with our work in the district will have a clear idea of what to do. So you can check that out on our website if you're interested, but we will be in compliance with that new law that went into effect on January 1. And that is all I have.
Michelle, did you have anything tonight?
Yes, I
I'm just gonna let you, excuse me, Stephen, do you need a few minutes to set up? Yeah, you let me know, because we'll just continue through the admin reports, okay.
Okay, so Mr. Dunkerley emailed both the principals at Williams and Glenbrook to see if there would be a way where we could actually connect with the students rather than with the principals, so that when we present what's happening at our schools to the school committee, it would be more direct, like you guys had requested. So I haven't heard back from Glenbrook, but Ella Barton from Williams Middle School, she's a 7th grader, will be the student representative for the school committee. So that was, Mr. Dunkerley had let me know before before December break. So we're gonna email her and see if she'd be available to meet with her, so we can explain to her the whole process that goes through, and then hopefully we'll bring her to a meeting when
Great.
everyone's together.
So, did someone have a question? So, Williams, was she selected or elected, do you know?
I am not
You
sure.
don't know? Okay.
Yeah, I just got an email that she would be the representative that
That's
was
great.
chosen. Yeah,
That's-
which is nice. So
She's not, oh, okay, I'm just curious to know if she's not already a representative, or if this was a special.
I have no idea.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would just reach out to Miss Allen again,
Okay.
you know?
Yeah.
Or call her,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think Mr. Dunkerley is actually working on that. So
Okay.
yeah, we'll see.
Okay.
We also went ahead with the food service coordinator, Mrs. Hobart, and she gave us a whole list of meals that would be available for vegetarian, gluten-free, and vegan students. So we're putting together a survey currently, and we hope to pilot the results of the survey. So a rough draft of the survey will be done by the end of the week, so we'll meet with Ms. Hobart again, and then we'll create a pilot, hopefully, for that. And then the last thing, on December 16th, we had a student-faculty meeting, and the student government decided to host this, project where students who had any concerns or had anything to convey to President-elect Trump, they could send a letter, and we would send them all together as Long Meadow High School to the President-elect.
Can we include our letters with your letters?
I have no idea.
I'm just kidding.
I don't know.
I'm kidding. That's great.
Yeah.
Great project.
It was, we had the whole student government voted on it, so everyone was in favor for it, so it was good.
That's great.
Yep. Thank
And
you.
how is the survey going? The food services survey? Is that
It's going
coming along?
well. Yeah, we had a rough draft that we finished, and we showed it to Mr. Dunkerley. He had a few corrections, so we're just finishing on working. on it.
What are you using for?
We're doing Google Forms. Because
Okay.
in the past, it's been very effective that way, because we can just send it to the school Gmail accounts.
Okay.
I know Miss Hobart had suggested that we could put it on the screens that are in the cafeteria, but we decided against that because that would the only people that would see those surveys are the people that are buying lunch already, and that wasn't the goal of what we were trying to do. So just doing the Gmail accounts would be easier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So we are going to flip back to business with guests, and we have our town manager with us tonight. Thank you, Stephen, for coming.
Oh, I apologize for being a little bit late.
Not a problem.
Basketball practice.
We go with the flow here, so it's all fine. All right, do you feel like you're set up and connected?
I think you did a source search. Where's the room? You get them
It's not user app or users.
Oh, sorry about that.
So Stephen is here with us tonight to talk a little bit about the DPW facility and to give us a bit of an overview and discussion, answer any questions that you might have regarding the DPW. So while we're working on getting up and running with the screen, do we have any other reports from Liz, from you, or Steele? No, not from you.
Not for me, no.
Stephanie? Michelle, Food Services, Energy Task Force, none? Okay. I had mentioned to Diane, I'm gonna try to remember, or I asked her to try to remember to send out an email before the meeting, just so I know which committees have met and who has reports for the meeting ahead of time. So if you can send those to Diane before the meeting, that would be great. And we're still trying to set up, right, Stephen?
Yeah, I apologize.
No, it's not.
It's a little bulky
It's not a problem.
sometimes.
So I'll just give a brief update. We were invited by the Finance Committee to one of their meetings in December. And several of us attended that meeting along with Stephen and Paul Pasturzik. It was really a nice invitation from the Finance Committee in an effort to improve communication and sharing of information, and really giving everybody a chance to understand the unique concerns of each individual and each board. And I really appreciated that opportunity, and I really appreciated the fact that the Finance Committee is doing their part in trying to facilitate good communication. I think that we, as a town, a lot of people are really wanting better communication between the boards, and I feel like we're all working hard at trying to make that better. I think we're headed in the right direction. So that night we discussed some very preliminary budget projections and talked a little bit about filing the SOI for the middle schools. I think we touched a little bit on the DPW and the senior center as well. And anything else, Marty, Russ, or Michelle from that night?
No, I thought it was a great meeting. It was a lively discussion and a chance for us to understand some of the challenges that the town's facing, and then I think a chance for the town to understand some of the challenges we're facing, and then what we're doing to make sure that we're kind of responsible and efficient and effective with the dollars that we have. So I thought it was very, very helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did too.
yeah.
Yeah, did you want to add anything, Russ?
No, I mean, I think you covered it. I mean, I think the three boards, to have that type of communication is going to help us quite a bit when we get further along in the process with the budget.
Yeah.
And I think just in relations in general for the next few years, the more we can do that, I think the better off we're going to be.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we just don't understand each other or where we're coming from. If you meet in a room together and talk, sometimes you just misunderstood something that was said, and a direct meeting can sometimes resolve that, so.
Right. And even if you understand and you still don't agree, I think it's really nice to sort of create that foundation of, okay, we still talked about it face to face. That's a really important component, and we might not agree, but it's going to be a really civilized, robust discourse. And I think that, you know, every community, every small town in our country is just feeling that financial pressure and that crunch. And the more that we can rise above the temptation to, you know, lock horns in our town and remember we're all on the same page, even if we're advocating for different needs, I think that'll really be critical in moving ahead and working together, both in terms of the feeling of our community as a community, but also in our effectiveness in our leadership. So that's my 2 cents about it, and I do think it's going in the right direction. And Marie's here tonight. I know you feel the same way. So thank you for coming tonight. Stephanie, I'm sorry.
No, once you're done, I wanted.
I'm done.
Just for the administrative reports, I keep not reporting on SEAL because I'm a member of SEAL, and Michael's, I think, the designated committee member, but he hasn't been there. But I think it's silly for me not to report. I'm kind of making sure I'm not crossing that ethics line, but I'm there, so I think I should report what we did, because I think a lot has taken place. So I'd just like to mention that in February, and I hope I get this right because I wasn't planning on speaking about it, but in February, the elementary special ed supervisors will be coming to SEAL to speak on the programming. In March, a representative from the Federation for Children with Special Needs will be coming to give a presentation on rights and responsibilities, and that's should be really exciting, and we're going to be advertising that. I'm gonna say maybe it's April, and we'll be advertising, letting people know that the middle school and high school special ed supervisors will be coming to speak on the programming that's there as well. So there's a lot of, we'll also have a presence at the open houses that are coming up in all of the schools, and having that information available, as well as it was just set up through a fundraiser through Mabel's Labels, which are stickers that you can affix to clothing or water bottles or whatever with your name and address. But I believe they give us 20% of the proceeds for that. That's a fundraiser that SEAL initiated, as well as an ISO group on Facebook, which is In Search Of. So parents who are just looking for services and information, it's been set up by one of the members. So anyway, I thought it's silly for me not to let you know what's going on, because
Yeah.
it's a very active group and I'm there. So I'm sure I left something out, but those were the big things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. All right.
Do you have a pointer? Yeah, I do.
Diane, would you mind letting Walt know that we're like a half an hour behind when you see him come in at some point? I saw a car pull in. Thank you. Thank you.
Special thanks to the technical assistance crew for their help in getting this project, projection done. And thank you very much, committee members and superintendent, for allowing me to be here to give a hopefully brief presentation about the DPW project and answer some questions you may have about where it is in terms of its status, where it is projected to go, and the timeline associated with that. So I'll just jump right into it, give you just a little bit of brief background. Next slide. So I've abridged the legislative history here, but the first study was authorized in the 1980 town meeting, and over the ensuing 30 years, there were several other studies authorized. The recent momentum was really started in the 2014 fall town meeting, where we received a $250,000 appropriation to kind of get us started on site analysis, initiate design. And that was recommended by the Finance Committee. So then the next fall town meeting, a year later, we hired a designer, and we wanted to get additional funds to continue with design, as well as hire what's called an owner's project manager, OPM. When you're doing a project over a certain amount, it's a state requirement to have that. So that's so we got that appropriation, and that was recommended to the Finance Committee. Weston and Sampson is our design team. Colliers International is our owner's project manager, and then In between all of this, there was a town manager's task force, and then the select board appointed a DPW task force that made its reports to the select board in the fall last year. That report was presented to town meeting and was overwhelmingly approved at town meeting, and the crux of the report was recommending the Grand Meadows Tennis Club as the preferred site for the DPW. So this is the existing site. One of the questions we get asked a lot is why not the existing site? And I want to just go through a few of the restrictions. So the first one is there's a cell tower right there with that little yellow box. There's a cell tower there. Going?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's several layers. So then that's the recycling area. Those are wetlands. That is our main sewer line that takes a lot of the sewerage from our community and brings it to our pump station, which is right there, Emerson Road Pump Station. This is a main drainage line that takes a lot of the south end of town stormwater drainage, that blue line, and brings it into the wet area over here. This is the solid waste. It was they called it a burn ash dump back in the day, where they used to dump, ash from home, fireplaces and stoves and things like that. So it is a regulated DEP landfill all throughout here.
And what does that mean as far as building?
It just means there need to be remediation.
Okay.
I mean, it's not 3 Mile Island. It's just a burn ash dump, but they're pretty common. But the soil conditions aren't really good for building anyway because it's not solid soil.
Okay.
And then the big one is the 100-year floodplain, which covers all but this part of the site. If you're going to develop, go back. If you're going to develop one, God, we rehearsed this all afternoon. Oh, yeah. So if you're going to build a building,
Let's let him go now.
one of these would potentially be a deal breaker for a lot of projects. And when you look at 7 major factors, it really all adds up to it is not a feasible site for this facility. It's not listed on here is the fact that we probably would not be able to fully insure the facility because it is in the floodplain. Right now we have the maximum coverage in the floodplain of $500,000, and that's what we carry because that's probably more than what the asset is worth. But you would not be, we did check with our carrier, and you'd either have to get extremely expensive aftermarket insurance or not be able to get it at all. So that's a primary issue. I mean, one of the things I've said frequently about this is you wouldn't spend your own money building something down there, so we shouldn't look to spend everybody else's. And virtually every study group since, I think, 2007 that has looked at this, including the select board, has eliminated the existing site from consideration for these reasons. I mean, I won't even get into the fact that the site is rectangular and not large enough to hold a facility that would meet the community's needs, really, even now, let alone in the future. So other committees have immediately removed it from consideration. The select board gave me a directive to not consider the Pondside Road site, but nevertheless, the town manager's task force, as well as the DPW committee, both went through in great depth the current site, so everyone understood why, because that's still a question we get, why not the current site? So.
Russ, I had a question.
So can we go back to that slide for a second, Stephen? I mean, the first thing I want to say, and it's the same thing I said at the Finance Committee joint meeting. I do think that this project, just from a personal perspective, I'm not talking as a school committee member, but as a personal perspective and a taxpayer, I do think that this building is in the worst condition currently. It should be, obviously the building that we look at to deal with first because of its condition. Mm-hmm. The concern I have personally is just I want to make sure that I understand why the cost has to be what it has to be. So that's why we asked you to, at least why I asked you to be here tonight, and I'm sure other committee members. So one thing I've heard around town, and I think this is helpful because it's videotaped, so now maybe we can answer some of the questions. But around town, what I've heard quite a bit is we understand, or the taxpayers seem to understand, that we can't build a whole building down there. But one thing I hear very frequently is, why couldn't we do like a garage? Just the garage down here, and the offices go somewhere else in town. I don't know where that would be. But if we did some form of protected coverage for just the vehicles in the area that's not, there is that rectangular area that would be over that old ash dump. Have you looked at that? Is that something that's been considered and ruled out, or is it
That's an
just not
excellent
feasible?
Excellent segue, Russ, to my next slide.
Okay.
So I have heard the same thing.
Okay.
And so one of the comments as well, it's just a garage. And I know that's not what you're saying. I mean, there are other components to it, as you acknowledge, but sometimes it gets distilled down to
Yeah.
it's, certainly vehicle storage is a concern, and I'll get to that at the end. But, first and foremost, it's an emergency operations center. I mean, our Department of Public Works is an emergency operations center, and I wasn't here in 2011, but I can imagine that agency was a primary response agency for that episode. And every time there's a weather emergency or other kinds of emergencies, the DPW often participates along with police and fire. So it is a first responder emergency response agency in this, and that is what a DPW facility truly is, like I said, first and foremost. It is also a frontline customer service agency. People go to the DPW to buy leaf bags, to get recycling bins, sometimes to pay their water bill. It is not just a back office function. It is a frontline function. It's not an engineering firm, but it could be. We have an engineering staff that has sophisticated software that they use to design our infrastructure projects, in addition to the maintenance of sensitive, vital town infrastructure records. There are management offices. I mean, the management team at the Department of Public Works, works every day to analyze and make decisions to help serve the community better. That takes place there as well. It is a repair facility for our vehicles, and in repair I'd also put wash bay, to wash the salt off the vehicles so they last longer, and also takes it to keep them in good working order. Right now, our large dump trucks that plow our main roads, we can't put them on lift. So if something goes wrong underneath, our mechanic is laying on his back either on the ground outside or on the concrete floor of the garage to try and fix it. Our most valuable asset is our jetter, our sewer jetter truck, that won't even fit in the bay, in the maintenance bay we have now. It's also a carpentry shop, in sign shop, and small engine repair and things like that. That currently is in the basement of a middle school. And then it is at last a vehicle storage facility. And vehicle storage is important because if you're able to store vehicles, they last longer. And those large dump trucks I talked about are about $175,000 a piece. So it is not an insignificant thing to keep them covered and stored and get the most out of those assets. Obviously, the current facility does none of these things particularly well, and doesn't do some of them. We do not have a wash bay. We don't have adequate repair facilities. Our carpentry shop is in a different location, so there's a loss of efficiency. When you spread out the operations, you do lose a lot of efficiencies that way. The communities that have built these recently have gone in the other direction and really tried to find ways to consolidate operations. So the engineering staff and the management staff and the public service folks are all right there and integrated day to day.
But I guess the question is, have you looked at potentially, I know it's not as efficient, but I also know there's a lot of places that do it that way. It's not option A, but probably option B. Have you looked at whether you can split the two in some efficient way? Or is that just more expensive, or has not been looked at yet? Because
it has been looked at, and it really isn't efficient. That we don't have a lot of great options for office space. Some of you've seen our office space array now in Town Hall and in the basement of Community House. We don't have great office space available to begin with. And if you're going to invest the money to upgrade it, you might as well do a consolidated building, because it is so much more efficient and so much better operationally.
So the first question I think you might hear at town meeting is, well, what's the cost of that option? Do you know what the cost is, or has that not gone that far?
No, I think, Russ, the key thing is we need a facility that works to meet our needs today and in the future. That's always been the top priority of all the study committees. The DPW committee, which was comprised of volunteer residents, just like all of you, really embraced the idea that the facility needs to work, and it just doesn't work as well. And it wasn't in the scope of the engineer's contract to go analyze office space. I mean, we have the JCJ reports for all of our town facilities. We can go back and look, but it just on its face didn't didn't rise to the surface as a viable option, and that's why we went with a consolidated facility. And the other things, we got feedback from the public about where can it go. We would not want to invest any money in the facility site down there, and so if you're going to develop a piece of property and start building a building, you might as well do it right.
Stephanie, did
I
you?
just want to ask this question.
Mhm.
So I've been to all the town meetings, I've been to the DPW meetings, I've listened to the task force. And I brought this up before, so I'm looking at this, I have a lot of questions, I have a lot of comments, and I don't want my silence to be taken as acceptance that, and that I don't have those, but I'm sitting here wondering, what is my role? I'm a school committee member. I have all these thoughts and comments and questions about this as a resident. We have no part in whether this takes place or not. They don't need our approval, unlike us, when we go to look at repairs and renovation of the school, we need the select board's approval. They don't need our approval, even if, I mean, if you're not, so our superintendent will not be speaking about this because, you know, maybe as part of this school, but he won't be voting on it because he's not a resident in this town. So I'm just wondering, what our role, what are we looking to do here? Are we looking to, you know, let the town know whether we approve of this or not? But really, it's as a resident, it's not why I was elected. Granted, we all take from the same pool of money, and I understand that. But ultimately, this is a vote that's gonna come down to the residents. So I keep seeing this come up at meetings on the middle school, and unless we're gonna talk about a long-range capital plan where we're gonna talk about the DPW and the middle schools and the senior center, I'm trying to figure out, you know, what our role and why this is, you know, happening and what you're looking for from us.
Another excellent segue into my next slide. You guys are just, this is great. It's almost like we scripted this whole thing out. So, what does the DPW do for you? And by you, I mean the school committee and the school district. They maintain all town facilities, including the schools. They develop and implement the capital improvement plans that are for school needs and town needs. And I will add as an editorial comment that since 2013, the school committee's top priorities have always been prioritized in the town manager's capital improvement plan that gets sent to the capital planning committee. We also maintain all grounds and playing fields, and much to my Parks and Rec director's chagrin, the scholastic sports always take priority over the Parks and Rec department sports. We work with your athletic director every year to schedule field prep and field maintenance so the scholastic sports are ready ahead of other programs. We also operate and maintain the water and sewer service. I mean, we do that town-wide, but the connections to the actual schools are also our responsibility, whereas it was your house, it would be your responsibility. And an example of that is we identified and remediated the lead and copper issues in the schools, and we issued a report on that earlier in the year, or earlier in the school year, I should say. You know, we perform snow and ice removal, parking lot maintenance, things like that. We manage the we manage a solid waste and recycling program at the schools, which is a great success. We've, working with Arlene Miller, we've reduced the cost of the solid waste program with working with the custodians. That's been a great success. And I've probably left off 50 things off this list. But I think, Stephanie, to your point, why should the school committee take a vested interest in this project? There's why. The DPW does it. You guys will heard me say this. The school district is the single biggest individual customer of the Department of Public Works.
Okay, if you're gonna open up that door, then go back to the other slide and I'll go through all those questions and concerns that I have. Because I have, as a resident, had them and I've been shut down, but I do have a lot of questions about the DPW, and I know I have them as a resident, I know I've heard them, and so if you are doing this to open up those questions and get that clarification, then
Well, let me get through
Okay.
a few more slides.
All right.
And then we can come back, because really the point is to engage the committee in a dialogue and answer questions, because like I said, because you are such an important customer of the DPW, you really should understand what the project is about, why it's important, and your questions are important.
I think that I do. I've been to, as I said, I've been to all the meetings. I've heard all the information. I've heard both task force that have spoken. So if you're wanting to engage in that way, then that's fine. I mean, I've seen this presentation a million times. I've seen it at the middle school. it's not to say that I don't think the DPW is important. I don't think you'll find any member of the school committee to say that. What you're asking for is an endorsement of a $15 to $18 million facility, and I don't know if that necessarily is our role. So
I think let's slow down for a minute and just go back to, I think having Stephen here tonight was really for the purposes of exchanging information. I allotted him a half an hour. I said, give us a sort of overview, give us the information. We'll do a little Q&A, but we really don't have time tonight to go into great detail. And if we would like to continue, along with questions, we certainly can reschedule and invite Stephen to another meeting. But just for the purposes of tonight, it's really just exchange of information and a little bit
okay, I
question
think
and
that
answer
was my
period,
question was,
Yeah.
what is the
So-
purpose? I mean, I've seen this presentation a million
Well,
times.
it's,
So let's
you
have-
haven't
but-
because all of these are new stuff.
Okay, so let's everybody hold on. Okay. Let's let Stephen get as much through his presentation as we can, and then we can do some Q&A.
I've got about 3 slides left, and then we can get into Q&A.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's some level of detail I can get to, and then there's levels of detail that
We
I would
can't get to, yeah.
that I would defer
tonight.
like the engineering firm, and I'd be happy to bring them in. So another good segue is I just put this up here. The DPW committee was impaneled by the select board to give this even greater detailed study with the support of our engineering and design firm and present their findings and recommendations to the select board. The members are listed there. I won't read them off, but I think if you know anybody on that list, I would encourage you to engage them offline, have a coffee with them and ask them as many questions as you want. I give that committee a lot of credit. They spent a good chunk of their summer researching this project and going through it in great detail, and many of them came to the table with very little knowledge about what the DPW does, what the sites are, what the constraints are, and through the process, they really did a great job and I think really achieved broad consensus, if not unanimity, on most of their findings, or all of their findings, I should say. Like I said, they met 15 times and analyzed 29 privately held sites and 7 publicly owned sites that were large enough to support a DPW facility. No, I have no expectation that anyone is going to be able to read this slide.
Yeah.
But this is just one component of their site selection matrix, and I showed this at town meeting. The only reason I show it to you is to illustrate how many data points they went through for each site, and those columns where they did the scoring. Anyone in that committee will tell you we spent many hours. They spent many hours deciding what were appropriate rankings compared to other sites, and so it was a very thoughtful process, and they went into great depth. And that slide is just really intended to illustrate that it was not just kind of a Passover, glossy look at it. They really got into the weeds on it. So this is definitely a slide that is brand new. I just got this late last week. This is the most recent concept for the DPW facility at the recommended location at Grand Meadows Tennis Club. And if you'll permit me, I'll just walk you through it briefly. One of the questions that we get is, can you reuse the existing building? And the answer to that is no. And the reason for that is
Reuse it for what?
repurpose it.
Oh, for some other
No,
completely.
well, reuse it for DPW, like adaptively reuse the
Oh,
existing
the current
building.
Grand Meadow property.
Yeah. So the tennis club, if you can, this is not working. So do you guys mind if I get up? So this is the existing tennis club down in here. These are areas of buffer zones because there's a drainage creek, dingle that runs through here, and you have to, for wetlands regulations, you have to be a certain distance from that. I mean, you really couldn't even build this existing building. You probably couldn't build it today with the existing rules. So you have to pull the facility back, and this is really built kind of slab on grade for a tennis club. It doesn't have the loading requirements for vehicles and a maintenance bay and things like that. So this is Dwight Road. This would be kind of the publicly access parking area for employees and general public. You would access the administrative spaces in here, so there'd be a front desk person right in there. DPW personnel would come in. There would be a gate here, and they would come in. Traffic would flow this way. You'd have a drive-in, drive-out maintenance bays here. You'd have other maintenance shops for vehicle repair here. This would be the wash bay. This is the salt shed. This would be the fuel pumps, and then they would come around, and then this would be the vehicle storage, and then you'd have covered storage for trailers, equipment, things like that out here on the side. It's about a 42,000. It's not about. It's 42,230 square feet of space. When a 2009 committee looked at it, and they had recommended a 48,000 square foot building. Weston and Sampson, in their initial program, had about a 52,000 square foot building, and myself and the DPW team, carved off about 10,000 square feet off of the program that was proposed by Weston and Sampson as kind of the ideal for the DPW. So we are and have been fully committed to making the building as efficient as humanly possible and reduce square footage at every opportunity without compromising the core mission of being able to provide our services, our core services, to the community. To the cost factor, it's Weston and Sampson builds these all over New England, and if you do any kind of major project like this, it's just a square footage. I mean, the bids come back with a price per square foot. These facilities are all generally cut from a similar cloth, and they're up over $300 a square foot. And so it's really, the cost is a derivative of your square footage tied to your program. The building is going to cost what they're going to cost, and that's based on the publicly bid process. And again, the key factor being it needs to meet the needs.
Where's the salt and sand? Is that still going to be where it is now?
The salt shed is that purple block at the
Oh, okay.
left side of the
So
site.
everything's going to be up here.
Not the recycling center. What's
Everything
that?
like that.
The recycling center will remain where it is. It's not, there's not a lot of infrastructure there that could be compromised in a flood, like office space and things like that. And
Expand that.
And I think there would be the opportunity to expand that. One of the things we're looking at right now is potentially developing the existing site for reuse strategy as like a solar farm or something like that. Because for the same reason you really can't build a DPW facility, you really can't build anything else down there either. So we're looking at solar farm, and then seeing if there's an opportunity to expand the recycling center, make that a little more user-friendly. So that is definitely part of our dialogue. So
What about sports fields? Could you do sports fields down there?
the floodplain really makes that extremely difficult to do, because if you'd have to cap the landfill,
Yeah.
and if you raise the level of the land, basically, if you elevate, if you cap it and put it and bring in fill, and so the field space is, say, 2 feet higher than the current grade, you have to find someplace within that same floodplain area to go down 2 feet as what they call compensatory storage.
Oh.
And that was really one of the big barriers. There's really nowhere, because the highway is essentially like a levee, everything is in that 55 to 56 feet above sea level elevation. And we went all up and down and could not find a reasonable place for compensatory storage if we raised the grade of that at all. That was a big barrier. So, as I mentioned, DPWs, they're all similar. Different towns have different operations. If we did our own solid curbside trash pickup, we would maybe have a area dedicated for that. We don't do that. We contract that out. Like, we don't have a tire shop built into our maintenance bay. We outsource our tires. Somebody comes and drops them off, or we bring the vehicles down. But this is basically a compact, efficient layout for our operations, and it's similar to one that was just really built in Bourne. Next slide. And so this is what they look like now. I think one of the things people have thought of is they don't want something that looks like what's there today built near them. And certainly we don't want to build one like that. So you can see the orangey part is the administrative spaces. Like, you can almost visualize, if you go back one quick, so if you picture looking from Dwight Road at that yellow part right there, go back to the picture, it's almost the same, where you have the administrative spaces set out in a more attractive but economical cladding, metal cladding, and then you have the larger spaces behind it. And then you can see where there's the fencing and security, around it. So they are, in terms of a massing standpoint, if you go down Benton Drive and look at, some of the buildings in East Long Meadow Industrial Park, it's a similar massing, an administrative space in front and larger warehousing type space in the back. So this is really, we think, a good example of what you could expect to see on that site if the DPW is built.
Is what you're proposing similar size, are you done?
I am done.
Okay. Is it similar size to other towns like ours geographically and population-wise? Is that comparable? Have you done that analysis, or?
Yeah, I think it's most of it's driven by operations. Like what services do we provide? How do we operate? But there is and it really is more tied to, road miles and, linear feet of sidewalks and linear feet of water and sewer pipe. It's the assets. It's the metrics tied to the number of assets we maintain. If you have a town that is higher in population, but most people are on septic and well water, then their DPW operation is commensurately lower because they're not doing water and sewer main jobs in the street. We have completely separated stormwater and wastewater. Some towns, they are combined. So we have a lot of stormwater work that we do. So really, it's not as much a clean population metric.
So what are we most similar to? I mean, how do we get to that benchmark where this is the right size for us? I mean, I'm just trying to anticipate questions that you're probably going to get at town meeting from somebody, because this town is so.
Sure. It's all the questions are all good. I mean, there were I don't know if I said 15 members or 9 members of the DPW committee. If you weren't on it, it's hard to really appreciate the level of detail that goes into it, and the complex factors that drive a lot of the decisions you're talking about. The first step that we go through is we do what's called a building program, and director's office. Okay, we need a director's office. We need file storage. We need maintenance bays. So you say what you need for spaces. And each of those spaces has a square footage component tied to it that are based on industry standards. And then we go through and say, well, we don't need an office that big, or these two people are going to share an office, or we can do without this extra maintenance bay. Some of it is best practices. Some of it is what we do today.
Okay.
Does anyone have questions? We really are getting to the end of our allotted time, and we have another guest who's waiting. So I don't know, Stephanie, do you want to ask anything initially, and then we could do a follow-up, or you can follow up?
I think it's just tough. I understand that the DPW, the schools use the DPW. I just personally feel that this is more of an issue. Yes, of course, we want the DPW operating. There are a lot of questions that come to me, just as a resident. People are not coming to me as a school committee member talking to me about the DPW. They're talking to me about the schools. So there's a lot of questions that, I have a slew of questions and concerns that I would need answered in order to feel like I could answer them. If someone came to me, and that's where it comes to me is this my role to
I think that was part of the discussion that Stephen and I had, was that there are people, because we're elected officials, we do get those questions, and so it's helpful for us to have some of the information. Obviously, this is just a start, but it is important for us to at least, have the basics and be able to talk about.
With that said, I have gone to every meeting. I have been at town meeting. I've been to almost every meeting. There've been a couple where I couldn't go. I had another meeting. So I'm very familiar with that, with all of this. The last slide, I think, was the only new information. So with that said, I've heard all the information. I've questioned the task force. And I still don't feel confident giving people information when they ask me, because some of that I still have questions about. So that's where it's not my area of expertise. I'm on the school board. Yes, we need the DPW. Am I confident? Do I feel like I have enough knowledge, and this is my background, to answer somebody's question about it? No. And so that's where,
Jess, can I just respond to real quick?
Yeah, let me just say one thing. I think that you have two choices in that situation. You can either refer that person to Stephen, or you can get in touch with Stephen or a member of the board and get the information yourself. Either of those choices are fine, but what did you want to say?
Well, basically the same thing. I think, like I said, I view as my visit here as kind of a courtesy to you all as elected officials and a central partner with the select board in terms of
Yeah.
managing the community.
Yeah.
If someone came to me, in fact,
And asked about,
people did come to me and say, hey, what about this redistricting thing? And I was like, hey, that's not my thing. Go ask the superintendent. But I at least was aware of where the issue stood.
Right.
So I could say, this is where I think it stands, but you need to go to the superintendent and ask them. And I would expect the same, where if someone asks you, hey, why do they need a wash bay? That may not be your question to answer, but you could say, well, I know that it's in the program for some reason, ask the town manager or ask one of the DPW committee members, which I love it that the DPW committee folks have really stayed committed to this project and came in, some of them really against it, and really through the process became really great supporters of it, because it's not me, it's not the town guy, trying to sell the thing. It's residents.
Right.
I'm a resident too, but it's residents and town meeting voters who really took the initiative to do this and have embraced the project. I really, like I said, I'm 100% confident that they can answer many of your questions. Maybe not to the level of detail, but allay some of your concerns that you or other residents have. I mean, like I said, they started off just like everyone else with kind of a blank slate going into it.
but even if they're not allaying somebody's concerns, I think the most important thing is to ask the questions, and you choose to agree or disagree with the overall project, or certain details of the project. But I think that it's really important to have the direct communication with folks, so that A, we have our facts straight, and B, everybody sort of understands generally the concerns that
I
are on
think
people's
that's
minds.
just general
Marty,
for
just
the
one sec,
residents.
Stephanie, I'm sorry. Marty?
No, I was just going to say, I appreciate Stephen coming out. It's been helpful to me. Clearly, they've done their homework, but it's helpful to me in the sense that as we move forward with the middle school project, that we understand, the town-wide needs. And the other place where there is a potential intersection between our middle school work and the DPW is the overall debt load. Right? And so I've heard Stephen talk about, the manageability of that and how that might play out for the town in the years to come, how the town might manage the debt that would be associated with the DPW and the middle schools and potential senior center. So I think it's important that all of them, are considered simultaneously, and certainly that's something that I've heard from this committee, frequently, so, sorry.
Russ?
But I think to Stephanie's point, and I appreciate very much that you came out tonight. I mean, I think it's very important, and we're meeting on the 23rd again for another joint meeting with the board, which I think that's going to be an important meeting. But my understanding of that meeting, and this came up at the Finance Committee meeting, is that when we look at all these different projects, one concern is that that the middle school project might leapfrog the DPW. And so I think the Board of Selectmen, and maybe you as well as town manager, really wants to see that the committee is not attempting to do that. Now, how that happens, and if it happens on the 23rd, is really the question, and I think that's part of the reason we have this presentation. I'm not sure what that would look like exactly for the reasons that Stephanie raised. I mean, myself, I'm not telling anybody that they should vote against the DPW so that middle school can happen. Because the middle school is years off, and the DPW needs to happen sometime relatively soon. I think if it doesn't pass, and it's the same thing I said to the Finance Committee, I think it's going to be the cost. I've not heard anybody on the school committee saying, go vote against the DPW so that we can, have our middle school. I don't think that would be a wise position for us to take. We haven't talked about it publicly doing that. Whether individually people think that or not, I haven't heard it. And I definitely would not be doing that. So I'm not sure if the board would be looking for a vote to that effect, which I think might be difficult to do as a committee. But is there some hope of the board or yourself that we do something like that on the 23rd? Is that really?
Well, I don't
Part of
want to
this.
speak for the board. I would defer to Maria on that, but I can sort of I can tie 2 points together that I think will come close.
Okay.
The notion that we have these 3 projects and no plan is something that, it always, makes me laugh a little bit, because I spend a lot of time working on all 3, and we talk at the select board level regularly about all 3 projects. The newspaper has written about them, so I'm always trying to get information out to the community about what's happening with the 3 projects. I don't know what a plan would look like that would convince people that we have a plan, but we certainly have debt service projections for the 3 projects based on the information we have now. Each plan, each project is, gestating on its own timeline, and they all are at different phases of development and different levels of need. So that's why they are at different places. And I think one of the ways we can sort of nail down and clarify this notion about the 3 projects in the plan is by the elected leaders and the appointed leaders kind of getting together and saying, okay, so here's these 3 major things that our community is interested in, or that our community needs. What do we think the timeline for these things is going to be going forward based on what we know today? And just say, okay, well, we're going to do this one now, and it's going to run along this timeline, and you can get as detailed as an amortization schedule and debt service payments and the whole thing, or just make it say, we're going to push this one forward and get it going. And then at the same time, we're going to have this planning effort for new middle schools. We're going to submit an SOI. We're going to have this planning effort. And then along that timeline that the superintendent laid out to the select board a month or 2 ago, kind of layer that on top of the first project. And then if it's the adult center, you say, and then in the meantime, we'll start working on design and planning and, an adult center. And if everything goes according to Hoyle, here's when we're going to break ground these projects, and here's when they'll be done, and here's how they'll be financed, and those are all data points that we can reasonably project today, and I've laid those out in reports before, but I think having some joint buy-in by the elected leaders as a sign to the community that, hey, we're on it, we're tracking these things, and here's our plan going forward, I think that would be a powerful statement.
We're going to need to wrap up, so any final comments before we finish?
I think maybe what you're talking about there is something that we would discuss with the finance committee as well. As what you're talking about there is really talking about those 3 projects and the projection, and I think it really came to light when we were looking at land and where each one was and what things were going to look like in the future, and when we were looking at particularly the DPW and then the adult center, and people were saying, all right, we've got these 3 projects, can we, where's this going to be or that going to be? But really the other big piece is, those projections forward in the debt, and what is this going to look like, and when do we have that discussion with you and the finance committee all together? I think that's what I'm looking for, and I think that's what the public is really looking for.
So that's a great place to stop, and I think that we will be continuing this discussion next Monday evening at the joint meeting. And thank you for coming tonight, Stephen.
Thank you for your time.
I appreciate it.
Could we ask, did the board vote to form that joint building committee meeting?
The permanent building committee, they did.
They did?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to advertise the positions, like the spots, and we'll begin that process like we do for board and committee appointments.
I would think the committee would probably like one representative if the board could consider that.
What the select board, the permanent
Yeah.
building committee, and we did some research on models in other towns. The permanent building committee is really a committee of people who are specialized knowledge, architects, engineers, contractors, things like that, and they are advisory to the select board for physical, like building projects over 50,000 is a number that has been thrown out in terms of size of the project. What the board decided was the capital planning committee, the school committee, and the select board may, at their discretion, have liaisons to the permanent building committee. So if there is a school project, like a major boiler upgrade or something like that, that's over the 50,000, a school committee member really should be a liaison to the permanent building committee.
So
to
there's
attend
no
the
elected
meetings.
officials on that body? It's just
No,
going to be?
It's going to be all volunteers. And that's a model that I've talked to other town managers, and that's the model they said works the best because it depoliticizes it and then gives independence to the elected decision makers for not being in their, in the formation of the recommendation. But certainly, we have every expectation that if it's a school project, a member of the school committee or the representative of the district will be, in the meetings at the table. But if it's a building project related to, renovating town hall offices,
Yeah.
it may not be, something that the school committee is particularly interested in that moment, so you wouldn't have to be
Okay.
a part of that discussion.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
We're going to have to go to commercial break. Not really.
Thank you.
Stephen, do you mind just giving Marty that little, I think, is the white one the power button?
We'll take both, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
In case he walks off with one. I think it'll work. It
Thank
didn't
you.
work yet.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Walt, do you want to come up to the microphone? Thank you. I'm sorry that we were so behind schedule. Not so behind, but, well, pretty behind. So, next on our agenda, we have Walt Benzinger here. He provided reports to us from an initial inspection of the 2 middle schools in December. So, I think the primary document we'll work off of is the letter that you received that says Marty and Tom and sort of gives the background and the overall impressions. Do you mind switching that screen off? Thank you. So Walt, do you want to give us sort of an overview of what you found? Just to give people who are watching at home a little bit of background, the school committee decided that we really should hire an expert to go into the middle schools and look at some of the air quality issues given the age of the buildings and some of the things that parents have been concerned about for many years. So this is just a really initial look at some of the things that are going on, and the school committee felt that it was important for us to fund this and pay for it. But we also know that additional expenses will certainly be generated from the findings in this report, which we will then have to discuss and determine the direction that we want to take. But I think at least this is a really good start, and although it's a little bit overwhelming to start off, I'm glad that we're doing this, and I'm glad to finally be shedding some light on what's going on in our middle schools. So thank you, Mr. Benziger.
Okay. So you each have a copy of my report. And again, this is preliminary walkthrough, a study of what the basic issues are in the 2 middle schools. And I worked to try to understand the existing buildings and some of the problems that are there, and gather the information on the day that I was there to try and make some suggestions about what can be done in the short term, the near term, to make things better, but also what other information might be helpful in designing improvements longer term. And so there was very little. I did real-time measurements when I was there of environmental parameters. And I was asked toward the end of the time previous to the visit that I take a couple of samples. And so I did that, only 2 samples for laboratory analysis. But I just want to try and organize it a little bit by saying that when we talk about indoor air quality and environmental issues in a building, and particularly in a school, we want to look at 3 basic categories, and we can talk about those in detail as we go forward. But the main things, I'm going to go with the EPA's discussion of the order of how we should look at air quality. The first one is having to do with source reduction, meaning what are the pollutants, what are the problems in an indoor environment, what are the contaminants, and how can we lessen the amounts of those? How are they caused, and how can we reduce those? So source reduction, if you can remember that phrase. The second thing is ventilation. Believe it or not, that is the second most important thing. And what is meant by that is fresh air exchange, or exchange with the outdoor air. The outdoor air is still the default good air, and so there's an interest in bringing in fresh air from outside, not only to dilute the pollutants that may be being produced in a building, but also so that there's sufficient oxygenation and so that different pollutants don't concentrate over time. And the third thing is filtration. Now, sometimes we move to filtration first, but what they're saying is we remove the source of contaminants, then we bring in fresh air to have more oxygen, but also dilute those contaminants in the air, and then we go to filtration. The idea would be there's no sense in starting to filter the air if there's a source of particulate matter which is a problem and we don't deal with that source. So this is those three areas are areas that we can use to try and think about how to organize our thoughts. Those two buildings, you know better than I do in terms of the history of those buildings. The Williams building is older, of course. Glenbrook is newer. The systems in the building we can talk about in more detail, but the systems that are important to my interest in describing the air quality would be the mechanical systems having to do with heating, air conditioning, and bringing in fresh air, and also the materials that the buildings are built out of themselves. And this would be surfaces in the classrooms, in the auditorium, in the gymnasium. So mechanical systems primarily, and also surfaces and the materials. And then going through the buildings, because they have a history, I looked for these sources of pollutants or contaminants in the building, and I don't want to get too technical about it, but I'd like to say that we can also break those things down to three different categories. Particles, which are objects in the air, particles. Chemicals, many of which you've probably heard, you may have heard the word VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. And then the third thing is biological materials, which actually develop in environments. So, and some of these categories overlap. One of the things that people are concerned about in modern times, particularly in older buildings, but sometimes in newer buildings, are biological materials and in particular mold. And so one of the things that I was looking for was moisture issues and possible production of mold in the two buildings, the older buildings. So I just want to go now to the two buildings and just give you an idea of the areas of concern that I have in each building, and they somewhat parallel that notion of source reduction, ventilation, and filtration. And the first one is the Williams Middle School. And again, this is a preliminary look at this. On the sheet there, you'll see that I've said three things about Williams Middle School. One is that one of the main contaminating devices in terms of mechanical systems in the Williams Middle School is the fact that in order to get air conditioning, we've been using window air conditioners or through-the-wall air conditioners rather than a central air conditioning system as we might have in another building. And those, as soon as I saw that, I realized that there's going to be some concerns about that. These units were brought in because it was the best alternative, I'm sure, at the time. But the maintenance staff, and I can certainly tell you that very quickly, the operation of these units produces biological growth inside the units, okay? And the reason for that is because there's moisture, there are dew point issues, which causes condensation, the air is not filtered, there's just a screen really at the entrance where the air enters the unit, and so particles, particulate matter goes into the unit, and that forms the basis for, in the presence of moisture, the basis of biological growth. So these window air conditioners, you may have in your own home, possibly, or you have friends that have window air conditioners. After the first year or two, they're producing mold, and so then mold is present from the operation of these units. And it's present even if the units aren't turned on, because the air is able to communicate in and out of those units. So that's something of concern, and I'm sure if you were to talk to the janitorial staff or the maintenance staff, they'll tell you that they've attempted to clean these units on occasion, and so that's one of the interests that I had there. The other thing is the heating units.
Well, before you go on,
I'm
so
sorry.
No, it's good. Just with regard to the air conditioning units,
Yeah.
the window units, one of the things that I talked to Walt a little bit about was, what are our options? Is it better to dispose of the air conditioning units and not have air conditioning at all at Williams? Or is it, can we keep up with the maintenance of having them taken apart and cleaned thoroughly on a yearly basis? So I think as we move forward, and that's not something that we're going to answer tonight, but it's something that we're going to have to consider as we move ahead, because the AC units are such a major factor in the contamination process at Williams.
Right, so
But did you actually find that there were mold levels? Did you test the units? Is that how,
Well,
they're just in
I
general
think,
that happens?
yeah, so I observed mold inside the unit. So I looked inside and I saw that.
Yeah.
See, here's what happens. It's similar to the home unit you might have. You might buy from Home Depot or Sears or something. The air goes in through the front, usually through a screen, okay? It goes in a pathway where it's cooled.
Oh, yeah,
and-
I've seen it in my own unit.
All right,
Before.
have you?
It's-
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I had a different house I lived in that had that problem.
yeah.
But I mean, how much of a problem is that as far as like health issues with those
Yeah.
AC units? I mean, I ran them for a long time and it had it
Yeah.
in there, but
Right. So it's just a production. It's a production of material. And one might ask, why would they create something? Why is something manufactured? How is it sold? Why does it continue to be sold? It's really a balance between cost and benefit, and the fact that they get moldy over time, we just kind of ignore sometimes. Now, when people say they clean these units, usually what they're talking about is cleaning the screen, that's in the front. And by the way, that filtration, the level of filtration is not really very fine. Okay, it's a screen that you can run water through, and it's a cleanable situation. And so that's not really cleaning. The cleaning would mean taking the unit apart, completely disassembling it, like in a shop or outdoors, and then cleaning the pathway for where the air travels. I'm not concerned about the outside where the compressor is and leaves or dirt or something out there, but it's where the air travels, and that's where the mold. And it's sort of an obvious one, but it's also obvious that we want to have cooling.
yeah.
And so someone in the past has made the decision, to have these units. They've been helpful over time. I'm sure that the staff has tried to clean them, but this is a major source of that sort of thing. And when we do testing, and there was a company previously that did some air sampling, and they did find that there was some fungal material in the air. But there will be mold inside the building because of the operation of these AC units, okay?
How many AC units are in there, and what are they? Are they individual window units?
Yeah,
Did
it's
you
a lot
count
of
how
them.
many? I don't
Big-
even know.
Well, pretty much per room. So each classroom has
So they're
one.
just individual units that there's nothing special about them. They could have been from Home Depot and thrown in the window?
Yeah, except maybe they're 220 or 240 volt rather than 110, so they're a larger unit, and
Yeah.
they have a higher capacity, BTU capacity. But there's one in each classroom. And this is what's used for air conditioning, when air conditioning is necessary, which it isn't right now, of course. And but it's an obvious one, and it's something that needs to be taken care of. So it would either be removal and replacement with another system, and there are other systems, or it would be a program of cleaning them successfully pretty much yearly.
The part I don't
we move forward.
understand is how is the distribution of those particles occurring when the AC units are not running?
Okay.
I wasn't 100% clear on that.
Okay, so.
Is
stop
there
me-
less distribution when they're not running?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. It's just
I don't
the
want to
fact-
get too, I don't want to get too far afield.
I know.
I just want people to understand and,
So mold is an interesting subject. We have mold that grows on materials, and then we have a distribution of the materials that come from that growing mold, which are spores. You may recognize that.
oh,
that
so
term.
if there's any disruption.
Yeah, or just, it just happens, like a plant giving off seeds or something like that, and there's spores, hyphae and destructive cell parts are the
I
things.
see.
And so, if you seal it out, if you cover over, then that can't happen. But if there's any air communication with a source of mold, growing mold, then you have spores, and you have those things settled into the.
Okay.
But the AC units right now in the winter are not covered, so there's
Right.
some air coming through. and it's-
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So air communication. The second thing is the heating units. These were patented in 1959. They were changed slightly in the 60s. We can't get the original parts for a replacement if they're a breakage of these units, the heating units. And again, these are individual units for each classroom. So in each classroom, there's a wall, a unit next to the wall, which communicates with the outdoors through the exterior wall, and then has a heating element that heats the air in the room, okay? And so, I mean, if old was bad, that wouldn't be good. I'm old, or older. It's not the fact that it's old, it's the fact that the parts are hard to get, and we've already, in the past, had a difficulty with the filtration, and that occurred before me in one of the last examinations. A company, ATC, they found that there had been these cleanable filters which were metal, and those were replaced with a more modern filter that has a higher filtration rating.
And disposable.
Yeah, and disposable. Now, a filter that can be cleaned, if any of you have seen such a thing or you have in your own, is not rated. The MERV rating would be 2 or 3. We need at least a MERV 8, MERV 10, MERV 12 or so. So a cleanable filter, and the reason is because the particle size is such that you couldn't run water through a filter. Water could not pass through a filter that would stop the particles that we were interested in stopping. So that was an improvement they put in. But the problem is that the rated filters, the new filters, even though I think the staff is replacing them regularly and doing a good job with that, they weren't meant for those units, and which means there's filter bypass. So if you can imagine very fine filtration, but the air can go around it. It chooses to go around rather than through the filter. So without going into more detail about that, filter bypass is an important part of the fact that we don't have good filtration. So the AC, we have a little bit of a concern about. We also have a concern about the heating systems insofar as they're communicating with the outside. Outside air comes in, it's heated, the filtration isn't as good as we'd like, and then the air is brought into the room. And the
then,
third thing
well,
has to do with this air exchange. Go ahead.
Regarding those ventilators, ventilator units,
Yeah,
it sounds like whatever happened before really contaminated the units themselves. So that even though we have those filters in there, when you talk about filter bypass, I think was the term you used.
Yeah,
Was it
right.
filter bypass?
Right.
What you're trying to say is that the mold spores and the other particulates, is that the
Right.
correct word, that exist in those units still are getting through. When the
Yeah.
heat's turned on in the school, it's being dispersed from the unit.
right.
So the filters aren't providing an adequate barrier.
Right, we think
Okay.
that we're filtering, and we're not filtering as good as we might think. Also, and we're going to see this elsewhere, many times pre-filter we're not as concerned about having contamination, because we think that the filter then will stop.
Right.
As air comes back from the school or back from our homes and it goes through a filter, we're more concerned about the supply side, where the air is actually coming out to us.
Right.
Okay? So in those units, the ones that I looked at, and we took one apart while I was there, the pre-filter side is not being cleaned, and I think it's not
When you
being-
say pre-filter, you're referring to the interior compartment of the ventilator?
Before the filter.
But that's the interior.
That's interior, but inside the
Okay.
building, right, and inside the unit.
Inside the unit.
Yeah, so, and that's directly related to the outdoors. So anything that's outside can come directly into the pre-filter portion of the unit, which is actually below, and then goes through the filter, and then it's heated and comes into the room. And I took a photograph, and I sent, I think, a photograph along of what the pre-filter portion of the ventilators looks like. And there's a lot of debris and buildup of particles and dust and these kinds of things.
So even if we had a system of cleaning those ventilators, we're still going to be getting the air,
Right.
unfiltered air
Yeah.
from the outdoors?
Yeah,
Okay.
so I sound like I'm being critical of the units, and I am in a way, because they were built at a time when the heating was the most important thing, and the air, the quality of the air, we weren't thinking as much about that at that time.
Yeah,
okay?
that's right. I think we might try to get some of these photos up there from the report as you're going, if you want to reference the photos that you referenced in the report.
Okay. I'm not prepared digitally to do that.
No, Marty's got
Oh,
it
he
on
has them?
his
Okay.
computer.
I wasn't prepared. There you go, right there. That's perfect.
Stephen, can you do?
Stephen will volunteer. Yeah.
Okay, so this is under the filter in what I felt to be an average ventilator unit, okay? And we can see, roughly that there's a mechanism there. If that mechanism breaks, it's difficult to find parts for that. That's an actuator that determines how much air is coming from the outdoors and how much air is coming from the room. And you can see that, and not to be critical of staff, because these people are working very hard. They've got a huge area to clean, and they've decided, that, and they haven't cleaned the pre-filter portion of these units. And so the idea is that you can see the dust and the material and whatever that is there, debris. The problem is that the filter above this, is not stopping all that particulate matter from getting up into the classroom, and that's the reason for that photograph.
Tom, sorry.
Walt, the one you took apart, did you see any mold growth inside the unit in this pre-filter area?
Yes.
There is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can
you
make that determination visually, though? I mean,
I-
is that something that has to be tested, or?
Well, it would be corroborated by testing, and also speciation, and what kinds of mold and that sort of thing would be more difficult and
But can
needed to be.
you can tell it's mold,
But I can
not
tell.
dangerous mold.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that's really-
so here's the thing. Fungal material, I don't want to go too deeply into this, but mold requires a spore. Spores are almost everywhere, certainly outside, and this is conversant with the outdoors. It requires food source, which is almost anything with a carbon atom, but mostly organic material. This is obviously wood and paper and dead plant materials, but also really anything with a carbon atom. It's anything that's organic. And then moisture. Now, this is conversant with outside, so, on a rainy day, this is damp, right? Air's coming in. On a humid spring or fall day, moisture's coming in. There's the filter, by the way, on the left side there, down below, laying on the floor. And so we have sufficient food source, we have sufficient conditions to grow mold, and it was my determination that there was visible mold inside there.
But the fact there's mold doesn't necessarily mean it's dangerous mold. I mean, you can have mold, and you can have mold that's going to cause you a health
Yeah,
issue.
and so that's a good discussion too. And so the CDC doesn't like the term toxic mold, and the reason they don't like that term, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, because that seems to mean that some molds are okay, and we do have molds outside, and they're common molds, cladosporium and some of the other molds, very common, leaf piles and different things. But really, we have a zero tolerance for mold growing inside a building. And when people say mold is everywhere, what they mean is the spores can come in through the windows, we can track them in, they can come in on our clothes, but they will not grow without moisture. And so we don't necessarily have to have zero mold, and we can't sterilize an environment. There's always some mold.
Yeah.
Certainly spores, but what we don't want is to be promoting growth inside a building where mold is growing on things because there's sufficient moisture and sufficient food source.
Yeah.
And so, now this is, it's not a huge criticism of the air quality. What it does is it shows that the air conditioning, the system, and the heating system is not doing what we'd like. It's not protecting the kids from these kinds of things. Is it dangerous? This is for a medical person to decide. I did take a sample in Williams of ambient settled dust in what I thought was an average classroom. I proposed that we have more sampling in the future. That was part of my report and why I did this. But what I did was I thought, I take one sample in this school, I'll take it in a representative location. So I was in one of the classrooms up on a cabinet with some settled dust, hadn't been cleaned for a little while. And I took a sample on a microscope slide, sent it through the laboratory, and I included the result here. And it showed that there was a considerable amount of fungal material, spores in particular, of several different types that were in that. Does that mean that it was in every classroom? Maybe, you see? Because it was a random representative sample rather than sampling a lot. Now, more samples can be taken, but I think it shows that there are some producers, some mold producers, and we're not keeping it out of the
And you're going to go through that later.
We will.
Yeah.
And then the third thing, just to keep moving on Williams here, is that this is the air exchange. This is the amount of fresh air that even the government suggests that we supply within a school, K through 12. And the way I measure that is with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is what we breathe out. We breathe in oxygen. A carbon dioxide reading in this room at this moment would not only tell us how much fresh air is coming in, but it would also tell us how many people are here, because it also takes into consideration the occupancy, okay? And then the government sets suggested levels for schools, for offices, and we exceeded those, or those levels were exceeded of carbon dioxide in most of the classrooms while I was there. It means that we would, if we opened the windows, we would have more fresh air. Of course, we get colder in the winter, hotter and more humid in the summer. But this is one of the goals of a mechanical system that we would design in a newer building would be to have sufficient fresh air based upon the occupancy, the number of kids or people that are in a particular environment. And so down here it says that the fresh air in this building in Williams is being provided by exhaust ventilation. And it was explained to me and pointed out to me as I was going through the building that we're exhausting air from that middle school. And the idea seems quite logical, that if we exhaust air from a place, any place, that air has to come in to replace that. And the idea is that we exhaust and then air comes in from outside. The thing that's happened, though, is in newer building science theory, exhaust ventilation can be detrimental. Now, it seems like the easiest way to bring in fresh air, because if we just pushed air in from outside, we'd have to worry about particles, moisture, temperature, etc. Okay? So the idea is that we exhaust air and it'll find its way in. It'll come in somehow. This is actually not so esoteric because it's being codified in the modern building codes. Recently, Massachusetts Building Code has started to suggest that we have exhaust ventilation in bathrooms that's on a timer so that our homes can have fresh air ventilation because we're pushing the air out. But recent building science has told us that this can actually cause problems. There's a couple of reasons. One is it brings air from unconditioned spaces. This could be spaces under us. This could be spaces that are inside the structure of the building, above the ceiling. in the walls, or it may bring in air from outside that is unfiltered, that has a higher moisture content that we want, and temperatures are not regulated. So what we'd really like to have, instead of exhaust ventilation, which is what we're utilizing in Williams, which does bring in some fresh air, we'd like to have a positive pressure, and we'd like to have a positive input of fresh air in a more controlled fashion. I hope that's not difficult.
Well, so to summarize, the exhaust ventilation is drawing air, at Williams, it's drawing air both from those interior spaces that you were talking about, the
Right.
unclean interior spaces, and the outside.
And the outdoors.
And the outdoors,
But
okay.
in an unintentional manner. In other words, the air's coming in around windows, around doors, you know,
Okay.
could come up through a floor drain, it could come from other locations.
Were any of these photos relevant to that piece or to Williams that we can go through very
If I
quickly?
have a photo of a,
Can we just run through those quick photos, those 7 photos? We have, there's one,
there's a shot of the air conditioner while I was looking in for mold.
I mean, that would be one area where it's coming in, it's through the air
There
conditioner.
you go. That's exactly right.
There's plenty of those.
In one of the classrooms, if you created a negative pressure by pushing air out of the classroom,
Yeah.
one of the openings would be through the,
Is that what's causing I saw the CO2 levels?
the CO2 level is more people than are sustained by the fresh air.
Yeah.
Exactly right. I don't have my device with me, if I
This
can
is-
check
so
it
this
right
is
now.
the-
There you go. That's a CO2 level.
Thanks,
And you
Mike.
see what it is, this is the CO2 in ppm, parts per million, 1355. The action level in a school is 600. So now, the other thing is behind there is one of the exhaust vents. So this is a large metal louvered vent, and the air is being pulled into that vent from the cafeteria in Williams, and behind that wall, that tiled wall, I was shown an exhaust fan that was pushing that air up through. Now that can be helpful. It can be helpful because it now brings in fresh air from outside. But the reason I took that CO2 reading there is because all the air in that room, or a lot of it, is coming towards that vent to be exhausted. So this is a good place to read the CO2 level as it's coming toward the exhaust vent. But again, where is that coming from? I'm going to give you an example. There are exhausts in the kitchen for the cooking devices and for the the combustion devices of the stove and these kinds of things. There's drains. And so we're also pulling air in through those areas, and so it's unintentional. It's not. We're not deciding where to get that fresh air.
But we're
Okay.
supposed to be under 600 and it's 135.
Yeah, at 600, we're supposed to do something. You know, we're supposed to go open the windows or do something. So this isn't off the chart. I've had, the highest reading I ever got inside of occupied space was 2,600, which is much higher than this. But what it shows
is this
is that
1,350?
1,300,
In the action level, 600?
600.
600.
Oh,
So we're twice.
I thought we were
Twice.
135.5.
No, we're double
Yeah.
the
I mean,
action level.
and
So
again,
what does that do? Make the kids tired, that type of thing?
Yeah, their algebra isn't coming as quite as easy as,
That's right.
It's true. And-
That's right.
But again, this is not by way of criticism, because, the kids were doing fine, they were happy, they were eating, but there were a lot of people in the room at the time, and the CO2 levels were higher. People were going in and out of doors, and there was some fresh air. In a perfect world, we'd like to have a mechanical system that would provide,
Right.
on a regular basis,
Filtered.
clean, filtered,
Air.
oxygenated air for the students.
Let's just, let's run through these photos. Are there any other comments that you had? What
Okay,
was
so
this?
this-
What
this
was
is-
this?
This is a vent, again, in a closet. Now, this is around the corner, and this is one of the closets on the way to the art room, okay, which is around the corner, in my understanding, from the cafeteria, okay? And this is another exhaust vent. And I didn't take the picture close enough for you to see, but most of these vents are covered with, dust and material because the air is going through them to get outside. It's acting almost like a filter there, although gross, and in terms of the size of the louvers. But this is another one of the exhaust vents. And there's another one in the second closet, the next closet over. And I noticed as I walked through the building that, these had, in here, for example, these are supply ducts. This thing over here is a supply, that's a supply. These are the returns, these grills, these grates. And if I think they look pretty clean in here, but many times we won't see as much on the supply as we will on the return, because the return is where the room, the dust in the room and the particles are going up into the supply to return to the forced air heating. Here's a shot of the window air conditioners that you asked about. And you can see that each classroom has an air conditioner that's been built in. Down below in the brick, you see almost at the level of the grass, those are the intakes for the ventilators. Those are the intakes for the ventilators. And that previous shot that we had was the bottom of the ventilator. Okay, and
Is that
that's
a
the
problem
heat.
that they're at ground level? Is that
That's right.
that's a bad design, probably?
Probably, yeah, not so good.
And then the next slide is, it looks like a
else we
ceiling
got?
tile.
Yeah, so this was in a room where I actually took a sample, but this shows that there's been moisture, that there's been, warping and expanding of these materials. That's a ceiling tile, which is a wood fiber material. And if you go into a room, this room is good, but you go into a room that has these kind of tiles, sometimes you'll notice that the tiles are slightly bowed. And this means that there's been some moisture, there's been some expansion and some absorption in those materials.
And then this is the last one.
Well, this is the boys' shower, so I don't know exactly why I was taking a look at that. They don't shower anymore. That's what he told me. He says the boys don't shower anymore. He says
There's furniture in there.
they go.
We're hoping they do at home, though.
I
They
hope-
just don't shower there, let's clarify.
There is exhaust ventilation in the boys' restroom and changing room, and that might be very beneficial. But again, I don't think the purpose was to exchange fresh air. It might be just to remove the moisture from showering and that sort of thing. I'm sorry, I don't know that I necessarily chose these photos for this particular day.
That's okay.
What else? There should be some more.
That's all we have
Yeah.
for Williams. There's
Okay.
Because we already did
Pictures.
the other
Okay, so
two.
let's move on
To Glenbrook, yep.
To
Do you want to look at the Glenbrook pictures now, or
if
do you
don't
want to go
mind.
through?
Yeah, while we're talking.
Okay.
Make it more interesting. So again, these are just bullet points. The Glenbrook has a different HVAC setup, more modern. The filtration is a more modern setup. There is fresh air entrainment that is going on. Some of the
Entrainment? What was the word?
fresh air intake that's
Intake.
being done intentionally into the HVAC systems, which are newer. There is one area that's struck me immediately when I walked into the cafeteria at Glenbrook. If you go in through that door, which is right next to the cafeteria, below the outside windows, right here, this was a grill removed, and this is the return air to the HVAC system that services the cafeteria. And that's going down through the concrete floor. So, and you can kind of tell that it's not real clean down in there. I mean, you can kind of see that. And the reason is that it's basically a long, thin cave. And I don't know that there are ways to clean that as it goes toward the HVAC in the return, but I don't think it's ever been attempted. And it's through the concrete. So this was a pipe that was installed underneath the concrete floor that is the cafeteria, and this is to take air from the cafeteria back to be heated and then to be brought into the cafeteria. So this is a situation where this is something that is contaminated, certainly.
This is a
and-
return or a supply?
return.
This is a
Return.
return. So this is taking the air from the
From the
cafeteria,
cafeteria.
shooting it down, and it's coming back through the
Coming
supply.
back in as heated or
Got
cooled
it.
air.
Okay.
And it was thoughtful, because before they poured the floor, they thought to themselves, you know, where are we gonna put the return? Like here in this room, you have these returns here. They thought, well, gee, we're gonna pour the concrete, we're gonna put a tube underneath the floor, we're gonna bring the air back through. But, and there are ways, as I said, to attempt to clean that, but, you know, you gotta really think about it, because it's something you can't really reach very far into, you know, so.
So one of the first issue you raised in the
Yeah.
report with Glenbrook was this underground,
Inaccessible
subterranean,
below floor ducting.
yeah, the ducts being,
And now, it wasn't, the returns are not all that way in that building.
Yeah.
But many of them are.
yeah, okay.
And so, I think it, just from a standpoint of common sense, I would think we can see that this is not, you know, the best way to handle this.
So we're talking about the HVAC system
We're talking about the
carrying-
HVAC system for
carrying
the.
these particles through and then pumping
Yeah.
it through the air when the heat's on.
Yeah,
in
there's
the
no
school.
filter going into that duct, so
Okay.
that's everything you can imagine, including coins dropped, you know, whatever else, you know, debris swept into it, and
And it's actually under
the slab,
the slab.
concrete slab, yeah.
Wow.
So, and it's just not the best way to do that. This shot isn't the next thing on the list here, but what I noticed there, this is the auditorium, and one of the things I talked about when I first began here was surfaces. And some of the surfaces, like this here, this is subject to a lot of traffic. It's subject to people, and, you know, the fact that people can be pollutant or originators, you know, so to speak, and this is unfinished or unsealed concrete, at least currently. And so this can absorb moisture, absorb odors, this can absorb things from our feet. It's difficult to clean, and it's certainly more difficult to clean because it isn't successfully sealed. And so this is one of the surfaces. Now then, the seats themselves are fabric, and require other, you know, there are other issues involved with that, requiring specialized cleaning. There's another CO2 reading.
Is that a classroom?
Yeah, that's in a classroom.
Second floor, first floor?
This was in,
I mean, is there any difference between the two, or are they all like that?
they vary. I think the lowest number was maybe 1,100, and the highest was, you know, 1,500. So it
Oh,
would
but
be
they're all
varied, but they
double
were all
the-
above, if the classrooms were in use, obviously, you know. The auditorium was the best, because there was only a small music group in the auditorium, and it's a huge volume
Okay, what was
of
that
air.
rating?
So that was down, you know, 800, 800.
But it's supposed to be under 600.
Should be 600 is what we're looking for. Then the relative humidity temperature is there. This shot shows the closure of openings that were originally constructed when the building was constructed. And I think, I can't say why exactly they're closed. You see the rectangular boards, right?
That's over at the gymnasium.
It's
side.
throughout the building.
Yeah.
Is
The
this
gym
where
is
the
also
trucks, where the
stuff, right?
DPW
No,
trucks are?
it is. It is.
Yeah, so that's the gymnasium side of the building. Yeah.
Gymnasium side, gymnasium side. But
Isn't that where the door is from the gymnasium?
No, this would be
Or
the
is that the other
back
side?
side. Yeah, this would be the back
side.
side,
and so
near the fields.
Okay.
I'm not making any statement other than the general notion that we don't have currently an overall view of the air coming in and out. Do you see what I mean? In other words, we're not actually using the facilities that we have. How are we using the openings to the outdoors? Are we bringing in air? Are we exhausting air? Are we, you know, just closing them off because it's cold next to them?
So
What-
theoretically, they would have been closed to conserve heat? That would have been the thinking?
I could guess that. Also in the auditorium of Glenbrook, the gentleman that was
Running
taking me
the
around
class,
said
yeah.
that I think of the 8 ceiling hung units, or 6 ceiling hung units, I think he said that at least 2 or 3 were not even operable anymore.
In the gym.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Jim?
Yep.
So,
I think none of them in the gym, right?
I think they operate, they don't bring in outside air.
They're
The
closed to the outside.
have plywood covering the intake
Yeah.
vents.
so my comment there is,
You
We
could
have-
tell, you could tell the air in the gymnasium was heavy.
Yeah.
It was very, it was just such a stark difference from how the rest of the school felt. When you walked in that room, you could feel that the air
So-
supply was just closed off.
so if we have tools, if we have the ability to do other things, then in a concerted effort, we might be using some of those things to make things better, was my point on that particular
Are
thing.
those particular units that we have in there, is there any way for us to utilize those in a way that could benefit the
Yeah.
school?
Yeah, they could. They have a device that raises a worker up to the level, so, the height of those things, because they're quite high, but they have a machine in the back that raises them up, and they change the filters using that device. And so they could probably be cleaned. But really what I'm looking for is, what are they? What was the original purpose? What part of that purpose can be reinstated so that we can make improvement in the air quality in there? And
And you do
so
think we could use
I
this?
think so. I think there must be some way. Maybe we could increase the filtration. Maybe we could open them again to the outdoors. Maybe they were noisy. Maybe there was an electrical problem and they stopped using that one, shut that one off or something, you see.
So we kind of need to access
We-
the
we need to
history
just
to
think
understand
about these
why it was
things.
closed down to begin with. Okay,
So
that's helpful.
let me go to the second one here.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
What happens to all the air that's heated? Just thrown out? Now, is that the reason why they went around years ago? I think it was 1973, the first oil boycott. I was teaching at the high school. And Mr. Orenstein was the operational guy. And we were pumping all this cold air in or bringing cold air in. So he plugged up the ventilators and argued that, well, we're heating that air now with very expensive oil. When those buildings were built, and when the old high school was built, oil was or gasoline was 14 cents a gallon. I don't know what fuel oil was, but it was comparable. So, is that what we're looking at here? I mean, warmed air is just being thrown out.
Yeah.
So you're facing an economic problem now. You don't want to throw out the warmed air. You want to keep the building warm enough for human habitation.
And the first.
But you're paying a price in terms of ventilation.
That's right, that's right. So, very good. And so, here's the story. The first thing to do was to close things up tight. But then, what happens to the CO2 levels and contaminants?
Soaring.
They go up and they concentrate. It's like this. It's like we're putting ourselves in the paper bag, okay? But then, we developed heat recovery ventilators and energy recovery ventilation. And what that does is, as the outgoing air goes out, we take some of the heat out of it and put it into the incoming air. And it's actually possible not only to get a 50% or equalization, but to get up to 70% of the heat and recover it, heat recovery ventilator from the exhausted air. And so then we can ventilate to the 600 if we were trying to get there and still get some of that heat recovered from. So that's.
Do we have those
We have
devices?
those available. They're available.
No, they're available, but do we have them?
No.
In none of our buildings?
I don't think so. I don't think we have.
Even here?
I think we do here.
I think this,
Probably here.
Probably this one.
Yeah, he only looked at Williams and.
But it is possible
That's why
to
we
do
look
that,
so wide awake.
and that is a concern. At first, we thought, all right, let's pay a little extra for heat, a little bit extra for air conditioning to get the fresh air. And then these inventions came along, and now we have a way of getting a lot of it back. The other thing to do is to monitor so that we're not pushing fresh air into a space that's not being used. You see? So trying to be proportional, and systems can do that also. In fact, there are some companies that are working with CO2 sensors that automatically increase the fresh air as the CO2 level rises and decrease it as the CO2 level. Think of a theater as a worst case, or even the auditorium in the school as a worst case situation. Sometimes there are 200 large animals, and sometimes there are 6 or none. And so the question is, how do you do that and still be energy efficient and cost efficient? So we can work on that. We can work on those things.
Can we, these heat recovery ventilators?
Yeah.
And things like that, can they be used on these old systems that we have?
They can. I think that Glenbrook is more susceptible to that because they have more centralized heating, some centralized heating. Williams, there are smaller units.
Okay.
In fact, I'm just going to tell you that there are units that we have to look at the cost, obviously, but there are units that bring in fresh air, filter the air, dehumidify if necessary, and even cool the air in a single unit. You've seen these mini splits sometimes where people have the compressor outside. You may have seen that, Mitsubishi and others.
Yeah,
And then there's something on the wall. That's right. Something similar to that, but also with the fresh air. Those don't have the fresh air, but with fresh air. And there are units. So maybe, I hesitate to say exactly, but maybe for a couple of $1,000 per classroom, something like that could be retrofitted. And then the air conditioner removed, right?
Is there anything that can be hooked up to the actual, heating system instead of getting individual room?
Well, in Williams, the heating is the individual heaters, the ventilators, those that you saw, or.
Well, the air conditioners, not the heat though.
No, the heat is
is?
also the individual units that are against that outside wall. In fact, sometimes they're right underneath the air conditioner.
They're like
Okay.
standalone, they
They are.
operate on their own, right?
didn't realize
They're
that.
completely
Okay.
not connected together.
Well, they actually use the heat, the hot water comes to them for their heating.
Right.
But then they pass air through that to get the heat to come out. But the air is individual. Each
Okay.
classroom
All
has
right,
its
okay.
own individual air coming in from outdoors.
Where Glenbrook has a
But
more fully
Glenbrook-
developed HVAC.
Right, because it's HVAC, okay.
Right.
Now, there are problems even in Glenbrook, and that's
Yeah.
one of the other bullet points here, is condensation has been promoted. Let's move to another, if you don't mind.
You were talking about the AC now, the second bullet?
Yeah,
Yeah, the ductwork,
yes. So any one of those.
insulation.
Any one of those, what we're looking at is mold growth on the exterior of Glenbrook HVAC ductwork. And the dark spots and is moisture and mold on those, any one of those slides. And
Is that the, like where the different parts of the duct connect?
yeah.
Is that what?
Yeah, and then so what's happened is there's been condensation, moisture. This is some insulating material. It's like a paper sort of fabric that's on the outside to insulate that, and then the mold is growing on that. Now, without getting too detailed, remember the filter, there's the return coming back from the school, right? And then there's the filter, there's the heating, the cooling, and then there's the supply, which is coming to the breathable air and to the students. On the return side, it's under negative pressure because the air handler's here pulling air back from the school, okay? What that means is that if there's openings in the ductwork on the return side, air's being pulled into those openings, cracks and crevices, okay? And so these are actually, that's an intake from outside, and so what happens is that mold can possibly be pulled into the system, you see, because it's on the return side. This is up in the, what they call the penthouse, which is on the top of the school. And this is also a picture of some mold that's...
The mold wouldn't be in the ductwork because the ductwork's metal. So you're just saying it gets pulled into the ductwork.
It could be pulled in through cracks and crevices
then
because
gets spread
it's under
around.
negative pressure.
Yeah.
No, what we're looking at is on the outside.
Yeah, but you're saying it could get
Could
pulled
be.
into the ductwork because
Through-
you're under negative pressure, and
That's
then
right.
it would be spread around
And then it
through the
could
ductwork.
come through. And then if it's not picked up by the filters, which is possible,
Did you see cracks on the ductwork that would allow?
Yeah, the
We're up
joints where the different pieces of metal meet. has to be perfectly sealed, you know, and that's actually code now, is that we seal ductwork. But I don't know exactly when this was put together, and it appeared to me that this was a risk, you know, so.
So the joints really
Yeah.
aren't sealed properly?
Yeah, I think maybe there could be better work in that regard.
Okay.
And then in the very last point from Glenbrook, to keep moving here, in the past, some intentional building ventilation opens have been closed. We talked about that, the mechanism, and discontinued. And then, to your point, sir, I say, without an overall fresh air exchange and energy recovery strategy. So this would be part of it. These are big buildings. It's a lot of heat. It's a lot of air conditioning. Can we save $10,000, $20,000, $40,000 a year in expenses by having equipment and monitoring and adjustments that we can make to save energy in these buildings? And there's a lot of good information out there about this if we look for it and work on that.
Well, before we wrap up, Glenbrook, were any of these other photos relevant? I just see there was one that has a red.
Yeah, so this is more difficulty. There's some fiberglass or particulate insulation here. This is a fabric that's wrapping this unit. There's some insulation on these pipes because they sweat if you don't have that insulation on there. But you can see that certain places there's been condensation,
Yeah.
moisture, and then therefore biological growth, mold.
What is that?
This is one of the units that has a heat exchanger or coil there, and I was told by the staff that they open this up and they attempt to clean this on occasion, but in this particular unit, there wasn't any filtration on this unit. So air was going in there, dust was possibly being collected, and then when there's temperature differentials, we can have biological growth in there, and then the air was coming back out. So there was no filtration at all in this particular unit.
Going back, Marty, can you go back to that slide for 1 second? So is that what the heating units generally look like in Glenbrook, that coil?
Yeah, if it's a localized unit, it was like this.
Okay.
Some places it has this roof-mounted unit, which is taking air into that roof-mounted unit and bringing it back.
So do they have some of this style supply and return, and then some of these? Is it both?
Right.
It's
right.
both?
Yeah,
Okay.
and this is one of the older.
But they're all connected to the same system?
Sometimes, I mean, for example, if it's heating, then it may be the same boiler that's doing the heating of the water.
Okay. And I think
Next slide, yeah. So here again, there's just moisture you can see has wicked up into that material on the right side there, and moisture is a problem. With biological material, moisture is a problem. The chemical pollutants, I did walk through with a VOC monitor, and the only places where I started to get some readings was where there was some recent painting, and also in the computer room, there are some VOCs which are outgassing from the operation of electronic equipment.
Right.
And then also, it's not a big concern, but sometimes in the art or special project rooms, there are some materials that can have some VOC outgassing. There's also the music room was a special case because of acoustic, for acoustic reasons, they had carpeting in
At
music room.
Glenbrook, at
Yeah,
Glenbrook?
there you go, yeah, at Glenbrook. And so we all sort of walked in there, and we'd have been talking about surfaces and talking about complexity and cleaning, and we thought, oh boy, we got carpet here, you know. How do we keep this clean? How many dust mites per square foot, this kind of thing. And then the question was, how could we have a floor which was more easily clean and dense surface, but that was acoustically beneficial? And there are floors. There are cork materials, which are smoother and more easily cleaned, but that have a more resilient nature that, can give you the acoustical parameters that we look for when we're trying to make music. And there are other ways to think about that, but that is a special use. The other special use is, I say, rooms where the ones where there's a lot of computers, where there's maybe 20 or more computers all in one room, maybe some printers. Also, there's places where there's maybe copy machines or other types of devices. There's really no issue with photography anymore. That used to be a problem in some schools where there were photographic chemicals. We don't have that anymore because of the digital revolution there. But these are some other concerns. So it says here, in the past, some intentional building ventilation opens. Yeah, so that was one of my points. So then, not to take too much time here, I was asked to look into what sorts of things could be done in the short term. And so, in regard to that, immediate actions. This is page 3. So if we inspect the HVAC air handlers in both schools for the filter fit, which we talked about, filter bypass, the duct sealing, which we've mentioned, and then cleaning of the ductwork, maybe there's an accumulation of materials, not just in the return side, but in the supply side, because then when the air goes through there, it can pick up these particles and it can bring them out into the breathable air. Remember, as I went through and I looked for a place to take my one sample in each school of ambient settled dust to see if a random representative sample could tell me the types of materials that may have settled out of the air in the school. And I found that there were areas of accumulated settled dust in all the classrooms. And again, not as a criticism of the staff. They've got a lot of work to do. And so I say here, cleaning of the accumulated particulate matter in all indoor surfaces, including those not regularly addressed. So maybe once a year or twice a year, there could be a special cleaning to remove and to kind of knock down the accumulation of the particles that are there.
A deep cleaning.
Deeper cleaning.
Okay.
That should be done by HEPA vacuuming or damp wiping only.
Okay.
We shouldn't dry dust or sweep inside because of the small particles can become airborne. Then I have monitor and increase the fresh air exchange rate. So monitoring would be a CO2 device, which we might have, and the staff might have, and they could move that around maybe in classroom to classroom and see what's going on, and see if there are some adjustments to the HVAC system that would increase the amount of fresh air and decrease the amount of CO2 in those classrooms. So in other words, just measuring and knowing might be beneficial in that regard. Monitor the indoor relative humidity. That can be done pretty easily in each classroom, and it might be interesting, certainly to the teachers and maybe even to some of the students, to know what the relative humidity, what the temperature is, what the CO2 levels are. It's an interesting sort of environmental science aspect that could also help with the environment. And then I say here, while the existing HVAC central air filtration systems can be made cleaner and more effective, it's also possible, remember the third thing from the EPA was the filtration, we can do some localized filtration. So for example, if, I hesitate to say, where to start with this or how much it is to do. If there were a special needs person or someone who was particularly sensitive to particles or particulate matter, or then you could have a standalone filter. Now this is remedial, not structural. In other words, we're not making a change which is most permanent and most effective, but it would be a temporary solution. For example, in the computer room, the VOCs that outgas and can be measured volatile organic compounds, these chemicals that come from these, a lot of this electronic material, can be picked up in activated charcoal. And some filters and filtration devices have activated charcoal, which would reduce the amount of VOCs. And that would be one instance in which a standalone device might be helpful in the short term, okay? This could also be done centrally if there was a different system. You know, if we could design the system from the beginning, we might make that the capability of the system, central system, along with central dehumidification, central filtration, central fresh air exchange.
And then, from a practical standpoint also, if we can have the cleaning be done with the HEPA-vac or the wet mopping or the wet wiping rather than, and not doing the sweeping.
Would
help to at least manage some of what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Okay.
We shouldn't, we try not to disturb the fine particles that are in things.
That's a good practical thing, though, that we could start to implement.
Exactly.
Just that alone.
If there is a manual or any document which just, delineates what the practice should be, once a month they do this, once a week they do this, once a day they do that.
Yep.
We could incorporate. I know that there's already concern about chemicals and toxic chemicals. I know that you folks in both these schools, they were using low VOC cleaners already. That's already being done. And so maybe the vacuums could be checked to make sure that they're HEPA rated.
Okay.
And there could be some different training that might go on at that level. And then at the last thing was additional investigative actions. If it were possible if we wanted to gain more information from an environmental standpoint, more exact information about what's coming from where and how much and what the problems are in the areas that I've outlined, what would we do? And I've listed a number of different sampling suggestions. Sampling for localized biological development. One question that we had was what kind of mold and how much is coming out of the AC units. Now, if the AC units are going to be replaced or they're going to be cleaned regularly, then maybe that isn't as important, but it might be, that's something that could be checked. We could check the output of this air conditioning unit before we turn it on in the spring. That sort of thing. Same thing in terms of the ductwork.
What would you check?
For particles, and then what particles? So how much mold or what kinds of mold are there? Are there other things that are there? Is there any lead or asbestos particles? Not saying there is, but, we can check for those kinds of things by sampling the output of some of these units. Then the next one is CO2 data logging. There are devices which are not terribly expensive, as I said, that read CO2, and they have maximum and minimum capabilities or data logging capabilities, so that you could go into a room and you could push a button once a day and find out how high that level got of CO2 in that classroom during the last 24 hours. Because, there might be, the number of students might be increasing or decreasing over the day. Pressure differential airflow measurements. This also has to do with the fresh air exchange, but also are the systems operating efficiently. Particle counting. There are particle counters which could, in real time, you can walk through and see where particles are more prevalent and maybe where they're being created. And it might help us to understand the complexity of surfaces, like in that, and what the problems are, like in that music room. When the kids come in and walk through and there may be a creation of particles that we can't see up into the air that are now breathable. And then some other things here too. So, but again, this was very preliminary. The idea was to try and get an idea, maybe almost an outline of how we might go forward, how we might improve things, but also how we might gain more information. Someone might ask, or I heard the previous discussion, and so much work has gone into the cost benefit of retrofitting, building new, in regard to facilities. Those buildings have been utilized all this time, I guess, for many decades, and they're currently being used. And I'm not pointing to incredible, tremendous difficulties, but I am pointing out some things that can be improved here, and some current situations which are not as we would like. Okay, they're not the way we'd like things to be for our children or for our friends and for the children in the community. And so someone might suggest that there be retrofit in the existing building. Other people might recommend that there be new building. And my understanding is that that has been suggested. I think it would take a little more work to understand the cost of retrofitting to try and rise to the level of the air quality that we'd like to have. I think that we could look into the cost, and then that could be factored into the equation as to whether or not we should rebuild. And this is aside from the occupancy and, how many people and is the facility sufficient and all that sort of thing.
Right.
But just from an air quality standpoint, I think that at this point, if the facilities are going to be used for a number of more years, and I think I heard a suggestion of 7 years, I've overheard, I think it would be well worth some additional investigation to determine what we can do in the next few years to make things better for those students. And there would be a cost involved in that investigation, and of course in the actions that we would take, but you would know more as a group to be able to make those decisions if we did that. So,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Walt.
okay.
Thank you.
Are there questions or?
Marty?
So appreciate your time
Oh.
and the study, and
My pleasure.
I think it's definitely opened our eyes to some things that we can do, some actionable items I think are being developed. I would want to, for anybody that might be watching at home, give a lot of credit to our maintenance staff and our custodial staff for the work that they do to maintain the buildings. Clearly there's some inherent structural issues
Right.
that make it a challenge, but they are swapping out filters regularly. They are checking condensation pans. They're checking roof drains. There is an asbestos management plan. They actually engage in some of the data logging that you're talking
Okay.
about in terms of, so I would want everyone to understand that there is a very specific preventative maintenance plan that's in place that has specific actions that have to be taken on a periodic basis to, do the best we can with the systems that we have. So I want to thank our maintenance staff and our custodial staff for the work that they do. You talk about even the particulate issue of cleaning, surface cleaning is important, so we need to talk to them about that. There might be some, Jess and I have talked about the low-hanging fruit. What are the first steps that we can take to address some of the areas that we talked about? Stephen and I were talking earlier, and he I think had a good example of how we approach these issues. When we had the state had offered grant funds to assess lead and copper levels in fixtures and in water supplies, and so we got out ahead of that. We were well ahead of many school districts in terms of participating in that. And so we did a thorough study. Dan McCarthy took that by the horns, went through hundreds of faucets and fixtures, and we identified specific faucets and fixtures that had to be addressed, and they were swapped out or there was some remediation. So when we have specific information on these issues, we get after it, and we'll take the steps that we need to make sure that you know, the water supply is clean and the air quality is where we want it to be. Again, not, you know, clearly we gotta roll up our sleeves, there's some work to be done, there's some short-term, long-term planning that we need to engage in based on this study, and you combine it with the study that was done years ago, I think, by ATC. So, you know, it'll be ongoing, and I know we'll be reporting back to the school committee periodically on this.
Russ?
I think the question we might get from parents is, and I see these reports on, you gave us, I think, 2 where you tested for air quality, in particular the mold and that type of thing, which I don't know what types of spores these are or whatever, but as far as safety of the kids currently, it sounds like, from what you just said a couple minutes ago, that these are things, you know, this is not the worst you've ever seen, it's something we can deal with. Do you see any immediate concerns, you know, or is this just something we need to handle over time?
So the samples I took were not of the breathable air. These were settled dust that had settled out over a period of time. So it's really sort of a view of what has gone on, but not necessarily anything that directly affects the students, okay?
Yep.
And I'll just say a very brief words about that those samples that I did take. There were no so-called toxic molds in those samples. These are common molds. It shows that there are some moisture issues, there are some filtration issues that can be worked on, you know, maybe done a little better. And I want to say the people that I went around with, which are the people that know the building and that handle the building issues, were very hardworking. They were very knowledgeable about what was going on there. It looked to me like maybe if they were to do more in any particular area, they would maybe need a little more time or a little more help.
Right.
But they were working hard, and they were very, very, very knowledgeable and very good folks.
That's the one thing that has come through is the hands, just how many people they have on staff.
Yeah. And they would say that to me. If I pointed out, you know,
Yeah.
something to them, they would say, yeah, well, I'm trying to get to that.
Right.
You know, but and again, I don't think that what we have here is something where there's a big health issue, and I can't really speak to the health of people. I'm not a medical person.
Yeah.
So I looked pretty hard to find these basic issues, and I tried to bring those forward so that we can see how to even do more investigation or improvement. I think everyone knows that the buildings are not exactly the way we would design them now, okay? But also, they're operating, and the kids were happy and apparently learning while I was there. So, and I appreciate the chance to do this. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take phone calls or emails from anyone, and at any time in the future that I could be helpful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walt. Thank you for being so patient and waiting earlier as well. Next on our agenda is subcommittee reports. We have the Finance Subcommittee.
Can I ask something? Just,
Oh,
not,
sure.
Not from them, but since we're talking about the middle school. Do we know how old those AC units are that are in the windows? So if we don't know, these are just questions that I have, are how old are the AC units? Do the windows open? Do the windows there, are they all casement? Do they open? Some of them must because the AC units.
I think they open Williams, Glenbrook, some of them.
Okay.
Do you know how old the AC units are?
I would have to guess, but the gentleman that took me around, that man knows a lot of.
Don.
Custodian.
Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe we can get some of these.
That's the guy to talk to.
I think
Okay.
they were done over
Yeah,
multiple years.
he's very knowledgeable.
Different ages.
Yeah,
Of them.
they weren't all purchased and installed at the same time.
Okay.
Okay. And
Thank
do
you.
we know the carpet that he showed the picture of, do we know what's under that? Is there foam?
I was
under
going to
that?
ask that question. That's something that we should ask because I don't know
But the maintenance, they must know.
Yeah, I think
if it's slab.
I think it's slab.
So if it
With
is
no
slab,
I don't believe so. I mean, it was that's original carpet at Glenbrook. It's been removed throughout the building except for this one room and maybe the teacher break room. We talked to Dan possibly about looking at it for a project for the summer.
It's not, and it's not a really complex project to have that, any carpet ripped out, if it's slab, have it sealed with a concrete sealer.
And I was just, when you're talking about the energy efficiency, when you look at the cost to run the high school versus the cost to run the middle schools, I had brought this up to Tom a long time ago. I mean, it's pretty astounding how much it costs, and I was like, why is this? And one of them's the boiler, one of them, it sounds like maybe the inefficiency of all of the, the heating system and the cooling system combined for Glenbrook. But then also, I know that there have been concerns about the AC units raised. I've heard it before, teachers not really wanting to turn them on because they really, recognize there's something up with them. And I wonder about their efficiency, how old are these units? How much are we paying to run them and
I
all
think
of that?
that's, the AC units is like a low-hanging fruit issue for me that we really need to look at this year in terms of what we're gonna do with them, whether we're gonna turn them on when it gets hot, or whether we're gonna, clean them or get rid of them. I think we really need to look at how we wanna proceed with, I think that's a significant issue. John?
Do we have any data about respiratory illnesses among students over the
The
years?
school nurses.
Does anyone keep track of
The school
records?
nurses have a record of all of that, and they would be the ones who could report the
Well, I'm just
best on
wondering
those.
if anyone's taken a look at that to see if there is anything,
Maybe we could get some data from them.
Yeah.
After listening to his report, I would have some real concerns about sending children back into those buildings. Seriously.
Well,
And I know,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I think we have some issues that have to be addressed, but I think what I heard at the end is that there's nothing toxic and nothing hazardous, right? So we're not compromising children's health in those ways.
I don't think that he said that there's nothing hazardous. I think what he said was, we don't have what would be classified as toxic mold, but we do have mold. So there are, air quality hazards, but, it's just, they don't rise to the level of we need to evacuate the building. They rise to the level of, we need to make some significant changes to improve the air quality.
And every child's different. right?
That's what I was gonna say, the
Yeah,
same
that's-
thing. Every
that's,
child is different.
We're attentive to kids' health needs on an individual basis, and if there's something in a classroom that a child is sensitive to, and we experience this all the time, it could be a fragrance, it could be markers, it could be
Right.
a number of things, and so
There
we're.
Right.
There are public health norms that I think you can assess the quality of air, and even say within, well, look at the high school respiratory illness reports, or how many kids are absent versus
Yeah.
elementary schools.
Right,
Is there a differential there?
right.
And I'm not a public health person, but it seems to me that's what those folks do. They analyze data to see if there's some trends there. And how many of you remember Legionnaire's disease? It was a respiratory illness.
Vaguely
Wow,
familiar.
Well, it goes back, but I think it was in the
Still comes up.
70s.
Still comes up.
But it was a hotel in
the
Philadelphia.
80s.
And the American
Oh.
Legion had its convention there. And as a result, I think 17, that figure sticks in my head for some reason, delegates died. That's how they discovered there was something wrong with the ventilation system in the hotel. And what was wrong was it hadn't been cleaned for like 10, 15 years. So I'm not saying we're close to that, please, but it
fact,
shouldn't take something like that for us to say, hey, we got a problem,
Right.
Houston.
So it's funny, Legionella is a specific thing that we treat against on a regular basis. So, how that's done, I'm not sure, but I remember seeing that in some of the preventative maintenance work that the guys engage in, so.
So in terms of next
Okay.
steps, we really need to look at what we're gonna do, what we can address sooner rather than later. And we need to put together a plan and put together a proposal for the town for funding. And that's really,
That info on the AC units as one of them is how
Right.
old are they, how efficient are they? I imagine they can be clean, but the question is it, do we need to look at those?
if you can send those questions to Marty, he can direct them to Don, and he
Okay.
could get those answers to us.
That'd be good.
But, yeah, I mean, the tricky part here is the short-term versus the long-term, like Walt was talking about, you know.
And I'd like to come back to you at some point, and it will take some time with sort of a comprehensive plan that had some short-term, medium-term, long-term steps. And one of the things I heard tonight is everything's connected. Everything's you know, we're talking about systems here. And so, you know, if you want to reduce CO2 levels and increase fresh air exchange, you know, you're drawing more air in from the outside. What effect, good effects and perhaps negative effects might that have? So you have to look at this, what I heard tonight.
Right.
You have to really look at it holistically, and you can't just look at one slice of this really complex system. But certainly the AC units is something that we gotta
The
take a look
AC,
at.
yeah, and the cleaning methods, and the venting systems like that they have in Glenbrook that are sealed up. We have to do some kind of investigation of whether those are, we can utilize those by a cleaning and getting a filtration system. That would be, those are some of the things that stood out to me in terms of now,
I would
a
feel
now
better about a
list.
deep cleaning.
What'd you say,
I
Liz?
would feel better about a deep cleaning.
Yeah.
Like
Over maybe a vacation
quickly,
or something.
yeah.
Yeah,
We could hire someone to do a deep cleaning on the vents and things like that.
yeah.
I agree.
So Finance Committee, we have a building use request and a substitute nurse rate for motion and discussion. Would somebody like to first make the motion and then we can discuss?
The Finance Subcommittee, I move on the recommendation of the Finance Subcommittee that the school committee approve the building use request from the JCC, Springfield JCC as presented.
Second.
So the request is for use of the high school auditorium on April 3rd from 6 PM to 10 PM for a film presentation. It's their anticipation, the anticipated attendance of around 100 to 200 individuals. And I believe we have had this type of event, we've hosted this event in the past.
Any discussion, questions before we vote? All those in favor? Okay. Next is the substitute nurse rate.
I move on the recommendation of the Finance Subcommittee that the school committee approve the daily rate of pay for substitute nurses to be $195 per day or $97.50 per half-day, effective as of January 9th, 2017.
Second.
Any discussion? Tom?
Jean Fontaine brought to Finance Sub a document, I believe it's in your packet, kind of showing the comparison to surrounding communities. We currently pay sub-nurses $100 per day. We have a number of absences that do not get filled, and so we're forced to go to an agency where we end up paying approximately $52 an hour due to surrounding communities offering a much higher compensation for vacancies.
Wow.
So to bring us up into a competitive rate, Finance Sub recommended that we increase our current compensation of $100 to $195.
And that's comparable with surrounding communities?
Based on the information that Jean, from her survey and that she presented, yes, it is.
Okay. Any discussion or questions on that? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. Middle school working group is next on our agenda.
So Marty touched on most of the update for us already. We continue to receive letters of interest towards submitting an SOI. I know that's being worked on already. Tomorrow we have a presentation at Center School for anyone who's interested in coming to hear more about the middle schools. That's at 9:15, I think, in the auditorium. Marty, do you know?
In the community room.
Community room. And since our last update, we have met with the Finance Committee, and we talked about that at the beginning of the meeting as well, and that was a good discussion. We discussed both the budget and the middle school projects, along with other town projects.
Policy Subcommittee. Stephanie.
In your packets is JKAA, and I do want to talk, I know Michael's not here this meeting again, to get some clarification on how to proceed with policy sub. If it's just me meeting with Marty, is it a matter of open meeting? Do we need to take minutes if the other two members are not there? I just want to make sure of how this will proceed with us, how subcommittees really operate. They're subject to open meeting law, but if one person meets, like if policy sub is sort of disbanding in a way, in the effort to get more done. You know, so that we don't have to try coordinating meetings and we can meet more frequently. But how does that work in terms of open meeting law, and should we disband policy sub? And I don't know. And then if you have a policy, how do you want to bring it forward if there's not, or?
You could have a subcommittee of one person.
And then do you keep minutes of that? How does that work? Do you have to post it 48 hours ahead of time?
I mean, we have a history in our district of the superintendent working with the chair or individual members on policy. I don't know if we feel, compelled to conform to the open meeting laws on those. That, I think that would be a little bit of a departure from the past. I don't know if it's necessary, but if we're crossing our Ts and dotting our Is.
Do we work independently and then bring it to first reading and then at some point bring it to subcommittee before it goes for final reading? Or, I don't know what the best procedure would be and how we.
I like the process you had described, where if there are some policies that are clear and obvious that need to be updated, you and I could work together. You bring that to the whole committee, and then it can be dealt with by the whole committee.
Not even as a first reading, just put it on the agenda and.
It would have to be the first reading.
A first
right?
reading,
And
okay.
then, but then the committee could look at it and make a determination whether or not it needed to be kicked back to a policy
Subcommittee.
subcommittee.
So the subcommittee. 'Cause
Okay,
that's
so at
when
that
you need,
point,
yeah, because
okay.
that's when you need to evaluate, if we're getting tons of feedback and there are a lot of concerns, that's
Then
where
it goes to
the,
policy sub. So
yeah,
it
because
would
that's where
not-
the subcommittee dilutes the work of the full committee, so
Right.
that it helps to offset.
So no meeting posted until that point if policy sub.
That's what
meets.
I would say, but Liz?
I don't know, I think you would want to just post your meeting, because if let's say you have a first reading and it gets, everybody's on board with it, if it goes back to your subcommittee, you might not pay that much attention to it. You might just say, okay, well, we said that was great, and then there'll be nobody to vet it, I guess. I just think maybe, and also in name of transparency, that you want to I'm not saying the people that you need to have your whole committee there, but just post it.
To post it. The only thing that kind of gets in the way sometimes is like, okay, we could do it tomorrow, but oh no, we can't do it tomorrow. Or,
Right.
Or if you're meeting and it's like, oh, we want to talk about that
Right.
policy, but then you can't because you didn't
It's
post it.
restrictive.
But what if we didn't make that first on the agenda a reading of, this is what, I talked to, maybe make it in Marty's superintendent, I don't know.
But if you're the only one going to the policy subcommittees and they're getting canceled, why don't we just make it a subcommittee of one? Because we haven't even voted on any policies this year because they never actually get to us to be voted on. So if it's just you, why don't we just make it a subcommittee of one?
Well, because I think
I still want the input from other people, because some of them are quite complex. But the legwork in the beginning would be helpful if one person's just kind of getting through that, and then at the end, you do have input from, the other two to say,
But if you
what do
have
you
a
think?
policy subcommittee of three, you, in order to meet, you need two people there. Otherwise, you're gonna keep canceling the meetings, which is what you've been doing.
Yeah. I don't know what.
So
that-
you can have a subcommittee, but if.
Do we need it as I mean, the thing that with it is that school committee is all about policy. That is our role, is policy. So it isn't, but you do need something going on in the background because there is so much work involved in going through them. But does it need to be?
I think,
I mean, the way I see it, there would be times where, again, it's such a clear and obvious adjustment that needs to be made. I would just simply bring it to the committee, perhaps preceded by a conversation
Right.
with Stephanie.
right,
And Stephanie could say, at that point, kind of signal me to say, okay, bring it to the whole committee. It's a simple adjustment to policy. Or
Right.
Stephanie could signal to me, no, I want to convene policy sub to look at that.
right.
And so, that's a practice that's familiar to me, where there are some policies that I could just bring directly to the committee that, are probably not controversial, or it's just an adjustment based on the law. In that case, sometimes there's no discussion really that can be had almost. You just have to change your policy to reflect the law.
That's
So,
right,
I mean, you could kind of put it on me. If I see a policy change that needs to be made, I check in with Stephanie, and then she says to bring it forward, or, no, let's convene policy sub on that. And of course, it goes the other way, where if, obviously the school committee is directing me to change policy in areas as well. So it's kind of a
So right now,
two-way
we have
street.
the internet policies and everything associated with it, which is in some ways a beast unto itself. And so I was gonna meet with Marty, and I was gonna meet with Nick George and get his input, and then start working on that. It is something that I wanted to do the legwork with them, and then bring it to policy sub after, say, what do you guys think of this? And then bring it to first reading.
Yeah.
But did those meetings with Marty and Nick,
No.
that's just
No,
one-on-one?
that's
So
you,
those
that's you
do not-
information gathering. That's
Okay.
absolutely fine.
Then let's do it with something
That's
so
fine.
big as that.
Right.
And then if something's smaller and Marty and I have met, I could throw it out, to subcommittee, do you want to meet on this?
Right. Right,
Or I could just bring it to,
right.
but then how does the open meeting, if we bring it to first reading without having a posted meeting on that policy, how does that work?
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
You can do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that sound all right?
I'm not
Liz? Are
going
you-
to weigh in on that, but you could also just call the AG's office, and they have an attorney of the day.
Yeah,
So
it's
if you have any
really-
worry about it, you can just call them, and
It's trying to, get it moving at this point.
if you explain what you want to do, they'll tell you on the phone right when you call what their answer is.
Yeah. Okay.
It's Jonathan Sklarczyk is the guy's name.
So we'll proceed that way and hopefully make some progress.
So let's go ahead with JKAA-R, physical restraint procedures. And this is the one that we looked at previously.
Yes,
So this
with
is our
Jean and-
Yeah, but this is our second. This is our second read. This has been posted, right? Yep. All right. So we already approved this on first read. There was no feedback, I'm assuming, when it was? Correct. Okay. So any questions before we vote on this?
You need a motion.
Yes, we do need a motion. Thank you, Diane.
I move on the recommendation of the policy subcommittee that the school committee adopt the revised policy JKAA-R, physical restraint procedures as presented.
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, thanks. I need, like a 1-minute recess. Can we make a quick vote just to go into 1-minute or a couple-minute recess? All those in favor? Thank you.
Second, don't you?
Okay.
Second.
Second, thank you. Okay. glad you're so warm. Actually, if we close that door, it'd probably be a lot warmer. It's probably that door.
We need to consult with Walt whether we can close that door. Is that going to create negative pressure, positive pressure?
So cold. Sure, totally. Second, they cut the audio and they cut the video, you know.
How do we know if he heard us?
He would talk back.
Oh, so he didn't.
All right, we're good, Tom, we're good. Thank you. All right, so we are on to ongoing business.
Do we have to vote to reconvene, or?
Yeah,
No, you just call it back to order.
yeah, so I'll call the meeting back to order. We are moving to ongoing business, and FY 2018 budget is the only item on that. Did Tom or Marty, did you want to, or I'm not sure who wants to.
Can I start, and then I'm sure Tom will have some details that I could fill in. There's a memo in your packet that attempts to provide you with a snapshot of where we are in the budget process. And as I said at your last meeting, it's both early and late, right? I mean, we're early in the
Right.
process because there's still some information we're trying to pin down, and yet the January 24th budget hearing's around the corner.
Right.
So Tom has been working really hard pinning down potential expenditures and revenue sources, and so this chart there attempts to give you a snapshot of where the budget currently stands, understanding that we're still working with the administrative team on staffing. Are there any potential investments we can make, and are there any operational efficiencies that we can identify? So, looking at the chart and understanding that this is a moment-in-time picture that can evolve and change, you're looking at a projection around where we are with expenditures if you were to roll over our budget in an attempt to achieve level service. So that $37.186 million figure as a level of projected expenditures, that incorporates the contractual increase that Tom has talked to us about of $949,000. So just to meet our contractual obligations, $949,000. Based on what we've heard from the town, we are anticipating revenue from the general fund to the tune of $33.425 million. And that reflects a projected increase of $272,000. That's the figure that Paul Pasturzik has given us in, I think, one of your meetings here.
Could you just tell us what the percentage that represents as a percentage? It's
As a-
less than 1%.
Yeah, less than 1%. As a percentage of the budget, 1% would be $334,000, so it's south of 1%.
It's like 0.75%, something like that.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah, not even quite. 7.2, I think, was what I calculated.
Okay.
So understanding the town's facing challenges, the reality is it really doesn't even match up to the contractual increases that we would anticipate. Special revenues, including grants, circuit breaker, and everything, we're anticipating a decrease there of $276,000. So that leaves a resulting gap, again, as it currently stands, of $961,000.
Marty, can I ask,
Yep.
why are we projecting a decrease in special revenue?
That's where,
State money.
that's where the guy with the details can,
I think there's a lot of factors, John. We I mean, the two areas that I would say we're probably going to be looking at would be our circuit breaker revenue for FY '18 and the tuitions that we are incurring cost in FY '17. So it's a projection based on this year's expenses. The other piece is we normally fund most of our grants, but there are going to be some grants that we will not receive in FY '18. I think the last piece is there was also some use of some one-time funds in the FY '17 budget. So, for instance, we used $48,000 in student fees from the parking lot to balance the FY '17 budget. The expectation would be we're not going to use them again since they're one-time sources.
So you're not really saying that there's a decrease in what the state's going to give us. It's that we've already committed some of this.
Correct. This assumption is not based on reduced funding from the state or reductions that the state may institute to specific funds at that level.
So the question is the extent to which we will be able to address the gap. And so there's a series of bullets there that identify the ways, the things that we'll focus on to kind of adjust that picture as it currently stands. One of the primary areas, and I think we need some feedback from the committee on some of these areas, but certainly we would respectfully request and hope that the level of support we receive from the general fund would go beyond the $272,000.
Right.
From the town.
From the town, excuse me. And then also, Tom is working very closely with People Services Director Gene Fontaine on reducing our out-of-district special education tuition costs, and that's a credit to the two of them for kind of rolling up their sleeves and trying to identify, frankly, better placements for students, more inclusive placements closer to home. Tom's also working with the LPVC on our transportation costs, so trying to identify some efficiencies there. And then the other areas, would be variables as well, staffing, potential curriculum investments, potential technology investments, and appears I'm missing a word, addressing the athletic kind of structural deficiency that we've talked about at this meeting. So that really needs to be taken care of so that we're not dealing with that athletic deficit annually. So that's where we are. We have the budget hearing coming up on the 24th, the budget presentation rather on the 24th, followed by a public hearing on February 7th. So there's still several important conversations in front of us, but we thought we would give you a little snapshot of where we stand and maybe get some direction from the committee on what that January 24th recommendation should look like.
John?
One way to address the athletic shortage or deficit, that's the one he talked about back in September, October, when he came to visit, is to increase fees. And some of these athletic teams are extremely expensive. I'm thinking of hockey, and there's even some talk about going into women's hockey.
We haven't yet.
I mean, I think we're going to have to talk about raising fees. That's the direction I would go.
We certainly can.
Cutting staffing, trying to do something with staffing, that's going to affect pupil-teacher ratio, class size. And there's just some areas we really can't cut if we were to be, fully responsible as a school committee. Our job is to advocate for the best interests of the students. That's why we're constituted as a separate committee, separate from the select board. And that goes all the way back to Horace Mann in the 1840s. And, for this select board to say, okay, they use the language projected level service expenditure, and then they only give us 272,000 out of what seems to be, by their own admission, 949,000 that we need to be close to level service is ridiculous. Plus, the select board likes to talk about putting the cart before the horse. Well, before they came up to any conclusion, they said, we're going to give you people a limited amount of money, and you go and work it out. Well, that's not what we can do, it seems to me. And I'm for digging in our heels and saying about the only place we can go is athletic fees. And it'll be hell to pay when that happens, because there's going to be a lot of parents who think they're paying enough already. But so be it.
I mean, we're talking about almost $1 million, so that's not even gonna touch it. So what are we, I mean, asking us to increase our budget by not even 1% is not realistic for operating.
Russ?
So the finance subcommittee and administration, we've kind of been struggling with what exactly to say to the full school committee in these meetings, because we obviously have a shortfall. Some of it can be addressed through administration, looking at tuitions and in different areas of the budget, but there still will be a gap, obviously, based on these numbers. So we have things like curriculum investment, technology investment, the athletic issue, we're really not funding it to what it costs. And then we have other areas where you'd have to cut somewhere, do something in order to get to the town's number. So what's difficult at this stage is to try and figure out, the problem I see is that the next meeting, we're gonna have to just present something as a budget, and there's gonna have to be certain assumptions, and yet we don't really know what the whole committee wants to do as far as those assumptions. So I think we need to talk about that tonight. I'm just not sure the best way to go about doing that.
So there's two other meetings that I would mention as important for us in terms of putting the pieces of this puzzle together. One is there's a school committee, finance subcommittee meeting next Tuesday on the 17th. And on the 18th, we're scheduled to meet with the joint administrative meeting, which is school committee chair, select board chair, town manager, superintendent, Mr. Mazza. So we'll have some information coming out of those two meetings. We are, anticipating that the town's financial outlook is maybe better than what we heard a couple months ago, but we haven't gotten any specific information on that.
But we made a request for it, right?
Request for?
I think we were gonna make a request to Paul or
To find out,
somebody to
right.
find out. I think we need to find out what is their position at this point.
I think that joint administrative meeting on the 18th,
we're gonna do it
that
then.
will,
Okay.
hopefully at that meeting, we'll get a sense of, the snapshot from the town.
So what are we looking for from the whole committee at this point for tonight's meeting? Is this, there's gonna be a situation where we're asking the town for more money, or we're deciding to maybe reduce services potentially, or not do some of these other investments that we'd like to do, and still ask them for more money. I don't think there's any outcome here that doesn't result in us asking for more money.
Right.
Because they haven't given us enough there's no way we can just take the 272. But it would be hard for all of you, especially to know how to answer that question until you know what might be the cuts.
Right. Can always look at enrollment again and see for the middle school, because we talked about cutting the team,
Mm-hmm.
and that would save, what, 400?
250, I think it was.
Was it 250?
Yeah, it's somewhere 215 to 250.
So our level service includes the contractual increase, correct?
If we were to bring forward, yes, a level service with all of our current expenditures
Right.
plus our contractual increases, that was the 37
37.
point.
So I thought that the towns, their instructions to us is they'll be able to deal with a level service budget. So why are they, I mean, it kind of basically is our contractual increases that we're short by. So
Yeah.
why aren't they honoring that, our level service, including the, because they know it's in there.
I
I'm
thi-
sure they're, on their town side, they're honoring their contractual increases.
Yeah.
In their budget, right?
Last year, they said level service. This time, they said, this is what level service is, and here's the amount you're gonna get, or this is what we project you can have.
Oh,
Yeah, their
That was
projection of a level
It's a little
service had a
different.
deficit of $900,000. In order to bring in a balanced budget, the 272 increase was the amount that would basically give a level, a balanced budget based
Right.
on the increased revenue,
Okay,
the
so-
increase in the fixed cost of health insurance and retirement, and then distributing what's left for the
Right, so
schools and
they're-
towns.
They didn't say a level service.
Yeah, because last year, I think they started at 808,000. This year, we're starting at 272,000. It was somewhere around 808, or I can't remember exactly, but, so we're starting in a whole different place. I mean, this is a lot lower.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure there's a lot we can do at this point, aside from presenting what we have right now.
What-
I'm not sure what Stephanie got.
What percent increase are we asking over last year? I don't have the numbers in front of me.
What are we asking for?
Yeah,
Well,
or what do
have-
we, yeah, what do we need? What percent is it
I don't
over
know that
last
we're
year?
there yet, and I think that's the piece we're still working the details out, is, you know, what would that number end up being?
But another way to look at it is 949 is roughly 3%.
Yes,
It's
correct.
3.
That
I
would,
mean,
Yeah,
if we
that's-
did a
exactly.
level service, we would need approximately a 3% increase
Okay.
in order to fund that type of budget.
3%.
Approximately, yep.
So ultimately, we're gonna be in a situation where, do we ask for 3, or 2.5, or 2, or, you know, I don't know what the number's gonna be. That's up to everybody to decide. My own opinion is .72, that's not gonna work. I mean, one, they've already told us there's other numbers because of the shops, and they budgeted a 0% increase from the state, or 0 new money other than the 100,000 for kindergarten. So those two things, we already know, that's like another 200,000 or 270.
It's like 180 or so.
180, yeah, something. So you figure we get a large portion of that. I think the rest of it's split up by 70% or something. So anyway, we'd have some money there that we'd probably be asking for. Beyond that, you know, I don't know what the committee's gonna wanna do.
How does,
And understanding that we're still chasing down some operational efficiencies in terms of transportation and the
Yeah.
out-of-district tuitions, and so there's some favorable things there, but,
And that's, I think we have to do all of that we can to show, we have to make sure this budget is lean as much as possible, without as much as we can without affecting services. Once you do that, then the question is, how far do we go into services?
And not only lean, I think I like to look at, when we talk about transportation, and how it's operating right now, and some people are paying for it, and are we operating those buses at their full potential for people who would pay to board the buses? And I think there's some issues with people, I don't know if they're bailing last minute, or whether the bus is, how many kids are actually on the bus, but if we're running the bus and paying for the bus, maybe it's an opportunity to, I mean, it's not gonna solve this $900,000+ problem, but I think we can also look at making things maybe more effective or efficient as well. You know, that's an opportunity, I think.
I agree. How much is it to run a bus? for a year, about 50,000?
Yeah, regular ed bus is a little higher than that. It's probably closer to the high 50s now.
That's a
The challenge we have with that is we currently operate 4 buses for our middle school, elementary run, of which one of them is at capacity for Glenbrook. The other 2 middle school buses are not at full capacity, but, you know, they're in separate ends of the town. So in order to be able to consolidate them, you wouldn't be able to get everybody picked up and dropped off in a timely manner. The 4th bus is for our students at the Wolf Swamp. So there really isn't an opportunity, unless we were to do something to change start times, which, you know, hasn't even ever been floated here. So I just don't know that the opportunity to reduce the number of regular ed buses is really going to be there. I think
Not so much reduce the number of buses, but increase the ridership if they're paying.
yeah, and some of the challenges, we have limited time between our tiers. So by the time the high school run is done, to get a full run in for middle school and make it in time to
So it's the
increase-
same bus.
We do use the same buses for the high school, and then it's basically a 2-tier system, a high school run and then a middle and elementary run with the same buses.
So
Okay.
what iteration would consolidate it for us fiscally with the start times? The middle school and the high school starting at the same time?
No, probably a 3-tier.
3-tier.
You'd have to change the middle schools and elementary where you could use the same buses 3 times instead of twice.
Wait, so
But
right
the-
now it's the high school and then you're doubling on the,
Middle
Middle and
and elementary.
elementary.
Yeah, but I'd say the
oh.
costs of going to 3 tiers would outweigh the benefits of the bus savings that you would get. I mean,
And there's so many other dynamics. Start times are contractual, and we would have to go to the
Yeah.
table to discuss that, so.
And I think it was
it's-
more my point of, if we don't have a full bus, you know, can
It's-
we?
And sometimes you're stuck with that because you have to provide transportation to students through 6th grade.
No,
for
but some of the kids, some people would pay for it. I don't know, you know, can we
Just say
increase ridership because people want to take the bus rather than, you know, I mean, there is a convenience for parents who work and, you know, I don't know how the routes were developed, but,
It's
you
like
know.
finding that sweet spot between number of buses and the.
Right, because
the
which
riders.
buses are not full, the elementary and,
Yeah, I would say the Williams bus and one of Glenbrook are not at full capacity, which we usually run at about 50 for secondary level. You know, we're probably somewhere in the mid-30s in terms of ridership for those buses. But, you know, again, looking at the route and where it goes and the area we're trying to cover and keeping it to a route that's probably less than 30 to 35 minutes, which is where we're at about now, it's hard to bring it closer to the schools, which is what you would end up doing.
So what do we want to accomplish with this discussion tonight? I mean, basically, I think,
I think you know, as we try to put together the budget presentation for the 24th, budget recommendation for the 24th, getting some sense of, you know, how much beyond the 272,000 are you expecting the general fund to contribute? So having some sense of that from the committee, and I think I know where the committee stands on, you know, in terms of protecting core services and making sure we maintain the class sizes that we've become accustomed to and that are reasonable and manageable. So I think I have some sense of that.
Do we know if the other town departments were at 0.7 or so, or we don't know that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think. I'm just curious if like police and fire got 2% or 1% or what's budgeted in each of their line items.
right?
I don't think we have that information yet in terms of what their requests are compared to what they're gonna.
Well, do you think that are you thinking that our budget presentation date is too early? Too soon? I don't want to put you on the spot, do we
we-
not really have the information we need yet, quite yet. And to that question, the governor's budget is the 25th. What kind of impact is, also the timing of that gonna have?
I mean, there'll be some additional information in regards to revenue, although, the town doesn't rely on local aid in Chapter 70 for a large percentage of our revenue. There is a piece of that most certainly, once the governor's budget comes out, will help that picture of what the deficit is overall for FY18.
I mean, it's literally the day after you're supposed to make your budget presentation. I just thought it was a little odd. I didn't know if even moving the budget presentation to the 31st, which we had down as a potential meeting date, would help in any way.
Well, we'd have the public hearing afterwards, though.
Well, the public hearing, though, is the following week on the 7th.
Yep. I
Yeah.
think the way we set up that timeline, though, there's not that much wiggle room, really.
No, it'd be a week at the most.
So the week really isn't,
And what you would do is take it away from the committee's opportunity to really go through it and understand it by backing it up a week. So I think we specifically looked at the 24th to give us a 2-week period between the presentation, having the opportunity for an additional meeting on the 31st if there was
Yeah.
some more in-depth conversation that the committee wanted to have before we had the public hearing. Historically, I would say it's done one week and then the hearing was the next week. So it didn't give the committee a lot of time to really digest and kind of go through and, understand it. So I think we did add an extra week in there. I don't know that backing it up at this point is really going to make much of a difference. I think that the guidance that we're trying to understand is, what's the expectation in terms of our presentation next week relative to that 272, that number that the town had in their presentation back in October in regards to the FY18 budget. Is it bringing forward a budget that we feel meets the priorities of the district and the committee, but then, prepare to discuss what steps would be needed to get down to a number lower than what we might be presenting?
I mean, I don't know. I think the first iteration has to be what we need to level budget. To level service. But that's my opinion. I know that's John's opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll echo that.
Michelle, that seems like a
What I'd like
logical
to see.
step to me.
Yeah. As a first step, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So present to you on the 24th.
Level service.
A level service budget.
Yeah.
And however the chips
We have
fall
to
in terms
because,
of-
I mean, as Liz said, those numbers, it's kind of profound how those numbers match almost identically, the contractual increases to the gap. I mean, I think that's the only way to go at this point.
And then on the 24th, we could talk about, after we see that, would you want administration to be coming in with anything about what else we could do to get to a different number? Or is it just,
I don't think so. Not that night,
so then that might happen on the 31st,
Right.
if we're gonna do it at all.
right?
So on the 24th, we might say, okay, let's figure out if we can cut another 250 or something.
And then
on
come
the
back to you with
31st,
that.
or nothing, I'm just, throwing out scenarios, but, and then on the 31st, you come back to us. That sounds reasonable.
That makes sense.
Yep. Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Very.
Well, I'm going to say this out loud.
I'm sure.
I'm in favor of presenting some completely unpalatable cuts, like, shall we wipe out the music program? You want to balance the budget? Let's get rid of music.
We could charge for kindergarten. Some
No.
bad joke, sorry.
No, but, I mean, that is an example. And how much would that save us? But that would also guarantee a large turnout at Springtown meeting of people up in arms to save the music program.
Well, we-
And I think that's what we're going to have to try and pull here. Get people to come out who will see past the rhetoric of the select board. The select board is now going to be in a position to say, we offered the school committee more money and it wasn't enough. they want even more.
I think people will come out in support of a
Well, I don't
level
know if people know the
service.
difference between a level service budget
Yep.
and a level funded budget.
No, I think people will come
And
out.
those are things that have to be explained. I mean, the
Right.
level of civic understanding out there, sad to say, is quite low.
I feel very confident that the parents and people in town will understand level service and contractual increases. And,
Well,
and I agree with you wholeheartedly, John. I think we are charged with advocating for the needs of the schools.
Mhm.
You know, and that means something different every budget season, but we do have to, I believe it's our obligation to put out there what we need. It has to be out there. That has to be our first step. We can't
agree.
automatically say, well, you know, we could chop off a few toes if we really had to. I just don't think that's the right approach because we're the school committee. So that's why I feel comfortable with that approach. And then, you know, we communicate, we figure things out, and hopefully we can, some of those numbers, those conservative projections will soften, and some other moving parts will change. But we can't predict that at this point, so I think we have to put out what we need to level service our schools.
For the 24th, are you saying that all the way along?
Well, I'm at least saying that for the 24th, and then I think we always have to be evaluating what we're gonna do next. That's always the last part of the discussion. What are our next steps?
well, that's where my proposal is for the 31st. I'm for having a level service budget for the
31st.
24th.
The 24th. Yeah, the
or
24th.
whatever. But the 31st, when, you know, we say, okay, where are we going to go? Because we're not going to get, or we're short of money. What are we going to cut? That's the only thing we can do, is cut. I mean, are we going to dream up some new revenue acquisition plan?
I think
It'd be nice
that's-
if we could, but I
No,
don't think we can.
But let's just, yeah, but let's let the process unfold. I think that's the best thing we can do. You know? Oh, Michelle, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Can I have one of those mints, by the way?
I think
No,
let's look at the budget that they bring us and stand behind it if we think that's, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
then we as a committee can vote on that. If that's what we want to go forward with, then we don't look at cuts or any, you know,
Exactly.
let's see what they bring us on the 24th. And if we believe in that budget, then I'd say we vote on that when we're ready and stand behind it, that it's what's best for the kids, you know?
Right.
But in the meantime, hopefully we'll have more information from the town about,
Right. Let's be optimistic.
you know, what, maybe their figures have improved. I mean, they sounded
Right.
like they did at the finance committee.
They always,
And then-
they always change.
Also, what the other departments are getting, I think would inform what we should be asking for, too.
Can we get that information from Paul, or is that tricky?
Yeah, I don't know that they're at a point yet to be sharing what the other town requests have as they're going through their process. They'll make
Well,
changes, I think.
I'm not thinking their requests, but when they gave us something that says you need 949 and we're giving you 272, they must have done that with every department.
Yeah, but that was based on just an assumption of an increase to the salary lines. I think it was at 3.5%. So
Yeah.
budget documents, I most certainly can pull up what their number is compared to our
That's what I want to say.
salary.
I think that's
can
important.
Just
get that.
simplistic,
Yep.
because,
We have to know that.
you know,
I guess I kind of assumed it was, that you guys had already talked about that. But if we don't even know that, that's critical.
Yeah, I have
we
that
don't.
information.
Okay, great. Are we ready to move on? Anything else on that? We have an overnight field trip request. Can someone make a motion, please?
I move on the recommendation of the superintendent that the school committee approve the preliminary request to secure prices and make arrangements for students from Long Meadow High School to travel to France and Switzerland in April 2018.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Next, we have a motion, if someone would please make it for the 2017-18 school year calendar. We are going to be voting on the parent-teacher conference dates.
I move on the recommendation of the superintendent and the calendar committee that the school committee approve the dates for the parent-teacher conferences to be added to the approved 2017-18 school year calendar as presented on the calendar dated December 9th, 2016.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Next on the agenda, we have the 2018-19 school year calendar for approval.
I move on the recommendation of the superintendent and the calendar committee that the school committee approve the 2018-2019 school year calendar dated January 4th, 2017.
Second. Any discussion?
Yes.
John?
Was this produced with the cooperation of the LEA? We had a problem with that a couple of years back.
Yeah.
It was?
So
Excuse me.
the calendar committee was assembled, and the contract has some specific language on the composition of that calendar committee. And so it's a joint committee, up to 9 teachers from Unit A, and then up to 9 members of the administration. I think we had 8 and 8 this year. And so this was the product of that committee. This was the voted and approved calendar that this committee is bringing forward to you. It also is my recommendation to you. I would say that this is for 18-19, right? So we're well ahead of schedule here, about a year ahead of schedule in terms of bringing you the 18-19 school year calendar. Part of the reason you're getting it so early is that it establishes obviously an end date for school, which establishes a graduation date. And we have to secure a graduation date with Symphony Hall well in advance. If the committee needed some time with this, we could bring it back at a future meeting, or if you're comfortable with it, we could discuss it and you could vote on it tonight. I will say, for what it's worth, sometimes you get years where there's a lot of possible ifs and buts and maybes in terms of start date, end date, placement of vacations. This one was very straightforward. There weren't a lot of variables in terms of those big dates that you lock into your calendar. It sort of fell into place easily.
Stephanie?
So was it this year, did we have, as far as the start date, did we have that Friday off before Labor Day? Do you remember? Is there a change here?
Professional day, I think, on that Friday or something.
I think they had it off.
Off, yeah.
Okay, they took it.
Teachers had it off anyway.
Okay.
Non-school.
So
year.
it used to be Friday through Monday was off for that Labor Day. So we're losing that on this one, and then for next year. And I know there's all that, a lot of discussion as to starting before Labor Day or after Labor Day, but then we did have that 4-day break this year, if I remember correct. We had that Friday and the Monday off, right?
I think it was like,
No, was it Labor Day, or am I thinking of October? Was
No, you're right.
Yeah, the October.
Labor Day, but Labor Day, they had the Friday off and the Monday off. We started earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then we had in October, we had a couple
Then we
days
had
off, too,
October.
That was
which
great.
was fabulous.
Wasn't it so
Yeah.
wonderful?
Um,
We should have an October vacation.
Yeah.
Just kidding. I think the Labor Day issue
So
is-
this one does
is-
change from that.
I think, well, I was on the meeting, but I think we were able to push the start of school a little bit later so that we could give folks that whole week off the week before. Whereas in the past, we were coming back like a week earlier, if that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what the issue was. So teachers were happier with that.
You're on this committee?
Yeah, but I didn't make it last week to the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So in effect, you have this same arrangement this year where,
So start date's later, but we don't have that Friday off.
well, you do have the first Friday in September off in the same way that you had the first Friday in September off this year.
What-
Because the first day of school, I'm sorry, I'm looking at 17-18.
Yeah.
Never mind, I'll pull that back.
What's the logic for starting
All right, so
2 days
17,
before
18.
Labor Day? And then the following year, no, next year, 2 days before Labor Day, and then the following year, it's 2 days before Labor Day. I guess I don't want to throw a wrench in the works. I just want to understand why it's so critical to squeeze those 2 days out of the calendar before Labor Day.
We had an iteration where we started after Labor Day, and overwhelmingly, calendar committee turned it down.
And they each, there was representatives from the calendar committee at every school, and they formally polled their membership, and it was overwhelmingly in favor of this draft, the draft that started school prior to Labor Day.
Why?
Well, and I think some of it had to do with not wanting to come in for one day and then pushing the release last day of school later into June.
Yeah,
So,
because they're still coming in for professional development days. The staff is?
That week?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
plus all of high school
We're coming
starts
back on the,
sports
they're coming back
the
on the
week before that,
27th.
So you have to be here anyway.
Is there any parent representation at all on the calendar committee?
No.
Yeah, I mean, presumably, you know, we hear from parents, obviously, the administrative team does, and so hopefully it's reflective of what we get from the parents.
I think we need to think about having a parent rep on the calendar committee. Potentially think about having a school committee rep on the calendar committee.
Last year.
Is that contractual?
Well,
It is contract.
No, I meant for, are we allowed to have a parent or a school committee to be in there?
The contract specifies the composition. At the end of the day, this is your calendar to
Right.
approve or disapprove. So you could disapprove, and I forget what the mechanism is. Does it go back to the? It goes back to calendar
With your
committee if,
comments
right.
and what you thought.
I mean, many schools are trying to go earlier into August, really because they're trying to get as many days in as possible before MCAS testing, for one thing.
Yeah, I'm not
But
so.
also, the teachers typically don't want to be working at the end of June, because we
Yeah.
don't have AC in some of the buildings, and it's,
So with the few snow days, you push us to the very end of June if.
and you
we
can't
start
go to
after
July,
Labor Day.
so.
I'm more concerned about the representation on the calendar committee. I mean, I feel like there should be parent representation on that committee. So if that's something we could look into, it would be great.
I think it may be a negotiation goal then for the contract that ends at the end of next year.
Well, let's look at what we have now, and then kind of go from there. Not right now,
Oh.
but maybe you and I can touch base on that. And then the other issue I had was, I know graduation for high school one year fell on a Jewish holiday. So I would like to have something in place where there's communication with the religious leaders in town, so that doesn't happen again. That was a really difficult situation,
What-
and the theater, the graduation venue obviously had been booked far in advance. So we need to make sure that we're checking our angles on that.
Yeah.
What's the graduation date this year?
It's Sunday,
June 11th, I
11th.
believe, at
Sunday, June 11th, yeah.
3.
I'm not sure what time, yeah.
It is at
1 o'clock.
Symphony Hall.
Marty, could you bring that back to the calendar committee about the religious issue and just making sure we're clear with all that?
Yeah, we'll double check it against the religious
Yeah, bless you.
calendars. I think you'll notice that on here, we have identified Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Good Friday, some of the others, Passover, Easter, but we could definitely do another check on it against the religious calendars to make sure we're not bumping up against something.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was last year.
Yeah. Like I said, there's no urgency on this.
Yeah, for graduation.
Um,
Last year was on a Sunday.
Sunday.
There was, maybe it was year before. Is it always on a Sunday?
In the next, I think the next 3 years is Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I heard was more sports. There was some issue with, there's a budget, but you can't avoid everything.
I know, you don't know if you're gonna make a championship or not.
So this year, it's the June 11th at 1?
Yes.
Okay. So what do you all want to do about the calendar? Should we approve I feel comfortable approving the 18-19 calendar if everybody else does tonight, but I'm also happy to wait if you want to put it over, but we definitely need to adjourn soon.
I almost want to, well, I'm wondering, we haven't gotten any input from the 18-19 in this change of the 2 days back before Labor Day. I mean, I know it'll happen, it was approved for next year, but.
I think 17, 18 was probably an anomaly in terms of that first day after Labor Day. I think the pattern has been in most districts, and the pattern's been here to start prior to Labor Day. I don't know.
It is prior to Labor Day, but we usually, we had been starting a little bit earlier, you know, if we were gonna start rather than doing 2, and then we were starting earlier so we would have that Friday off before Labor Day. That was this year. And I know parents had come in and spoken before about the change that happened. I believe for this year, was it? And
The
then.
ones that came and said, can you just shove the days together so that we have more longer weeks?
Right.
That was their.
Yeah, because we were having, not full weeks.
And that got fixed, I
Yeah,
think,
that's
with a lot of the changes, I think for this school year, they fixed that pretty well.
But to go earlier in 18-19, you'd push the teacher workday
Right.
to the preceding week
They'd be coming back a week earlier.
on the 24th. Or
Teachers would be.
Which they had been doing,
Yeah.
but they don't like it.
They would rather give up that Friday before Labor Day weekend to have that whole complete week, the
That's
third week in
what-
August completely.
I don't know. I don't know if there was an opportunity for parents to speak about that change, or are we just gonna push it through?
I don't know.
I think the way, well, there-
Teachers who have kids.
I think, last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, Marie asked me to sit on the calendar committee as a liaison from the school committee.
Yeah.
But, I didn't want to weigh in as a parent. I felt like I had to just be there to listen, because I think the intent of the calendar committee was for the teachers and administration to plan the calendar, and I'm not saying it needs to be that way. I just think that's how it was. So I don't think anyone in there is voicing their opinion. I don't perceive it as being a parent, you know what I mean? And so I think it's really just the teachers and the administration in terms of how it works for the students, and, they would pay attention to how the week would flow before, if it's worth having 2 days of school, or if it's better to have a full week of school, that sort of
Okay.
thing. But
Okay.
parents weren't brought into the discussion in terms of my experience with it. I didn't. Does that answer anybody's questions?
Yeah, I don't know, since we have the final vote, is it something that we would, in some ways, I think I'd feel more comfortable, at least if parents weren't aware of it, if they have a chance to voice their opinion on it.
well, how would you do that? Just post it on the website or something? or-
No, I think what you're saying is just put it off a meeting and then letting people know
Letting parents, so
that
I
if they
didn't,
want.
I mean, they might not have been aware that it was for 2018-19. I don't know if that was posted, that wasn't just for next year, but we were
Yeah,
looking at 2 years' worth of calendar.
No one would have, this has not been distributed widely, the 18-19 calendar. You're the first group to
So
take a
maybe
look
it
at
does, I mean, I don't see anything controversial, but.
I would just like
but
to, there's a change,
think
I
it would
think
be
it's
good to-
worth making, I mean,
Yeah, so
just
how,
to hear if anyone says anything, so they know. I don't know
Yeah.
that anyone knew we were voting on the 18-19.
well, it's only on the agenda, but it's
Yeah.
not posted.
We've been doing 2 years ahead of time because of the graduation for a
Right.
couple years now.
Right. So what would be a good way to put it out for, posting it
Can
on the
we
website?
post it so they
And
can-
just say, I don't know if that's a good idea, I don't know.
Yeah, there's so many variables that perhaps parents might not see with the calendar. Contract, MCAS. I think what we hear, I mean, I wouldn't want anybody listening at home to think that we are not attentive to the feedback that we get from parents. I think we get feedback regularly from parents, and hopefully I think that's why you have a calendar committee that's sort of 9 and 9 administrators, 9 teachers. I mean, hopefully we're, as administrators, we're the ones that are balancing student learning against the needs of the community and what we hear from parents. So that discussion happens. I think what we hear from parents, and this has been the case with calendars as long as I've been putting these things together, it's continuity. You know, please don't, you know, can we create some educational continuity? Can we avoid breaking up instructional weeks? Can we, you know, and if you do have to put a professional development day, bump it up against a long weekend, or so to artificially create a long weekend at the beginning of school, I think you're going to get half the parents are going to say that's wonderful, and half the parents are going to say, what, we just sent them to you and now they're back with us, and they need a vacation already. So I think we'd have to be very careful about how we receive that feedback and how we process that feedback.
One of the most consistent things I hear about the calendar from parents, and this is over years and years, is getting rid of a vacation. And usually it's the February vacation that parents talk about. I'm not advocating we get rid of it or keep it. I'm just saying that it comes up time and time again.
What do you mean, not have it?
Right.
Make one March instead of February and April sometimes.
Right, something like that, yeah.
Do it what?
Make one March vacation instead of February and April.
Yeah.
Have it in March.
Yeah.
I also think
I'm not
that
opposed
I'd shoot myself.
if you have different age students,
what we're doing.
you have no idea what your life is going to be like when you have high schoolers. It's completely different than when you have an elementary school child. So maybe everybody in the high school wants those February breaks, but everybody in elementary can't stand to have their kids home for a week. So we need to realize that there are 3,000 students at every different level, and there's all different opinions, and that's why the teachers who teach all those levels have that expertise on how to make a calendar, realizing all the different moving parts in it. And if you're just an elementary school parent, I'm not saying that you don't know what's going on in high school, but you kind of are in that elementary bubble and you're not realizing how high school works or whatever.
Stephanie?
I don't know the distribution of teachers. I think there's 9 teachers, 9 admin on the calendar committee, but my point was more, it's changed. It changed from to 17 to 18, which I didn't realize, and then we're doing similar from 18 to 19, but it's a pretty drastic change. The kids were in school 4 days, and then it had a day off. So the question to me is, and I'm hearing the change was because the teachers, and all due respect, didn't want to come in a week before. I'm not hearing MCAS. I'm not hearing anything else. I'm hearing about their schedules. I'm curious as to what is that like for kids to come in for just 2 days. And I'm not saying push it off that week. I'm just, kids are just settling in. You've got their first day, you've got a second day, and boom, you're gone.
I think it's actually great for kids not to
But
have.
2 days is so.
It's short, but it's nice because it kind of gets the kid, they get started, they get acclimated, they get used to what they're going to be doing, but they don't have that full intense sort of week. So I think it's good from that perspective.
Your contract with teachers, just so you know, it says that, I'm just looking at it, every effort will be made to avoid extending the work year into the 4th week of June.
Oh.
So in this case,
Every effort?
every effort will be made to avoid extending the work year into the 4th week of June.
The 4th week, yeah. Okay.
So right now, you're not in the 4th week,
What's
no.
the beginning say,
Your
though?
August
How
snow
early
days.
in August can you go?
It doesn't say anything on that. That's what I was checking to see if there was some language. All right, so if you factor in snow dates, if you push the end, let's say you did something that pushed the end of school to June 20th, let's say, right? Now you're really
Right,
putting
of course.
yourself in a position where you're going to school probably June 24, June 25. So I think that's where you got to be careful as it is.
I would rather just vote the calendar, and then if people really have an issue with it, they could let us know, and we can always reassess. We got plenty of time, but.
Can you do that? I know we amended, added, but.
As long as whoever was on to be considered.
The majority.
Whoever was on the winning side brought it back up.
Yeah.
So whoever voted
That's
for
fine.
the calendar
Yeah.
decided to have it reassessed.
I would just like an opportunity, since parents haven't seen it, if there's a big issue and,
That's fair. That makes sense.
I mean, I don't really care one way or the other. I'm just saying
my guess is we're not gonna get a lot of feedback on it.
But
And
yeah.
looking at this, I just don't know how we could really change it drastically anyway. It's kind of.
It's just changed from, that was my point. It was changed from this year, next year changed, the year after changed. And I don't know if people are aware of it, and I just didn't want to make it a situation where we vote on it and it absolutely can't be changed because of something we didn't know because parents didn't have the opportunity to give that input. And I know in the past, parents have come and talked about certain things and not breaking up weeks so much in certain months. And I have heard, the whole Labor Day controversy, but, I just would like it so if there is something that we don't know, because parents have not weighed in, that we have the opportunity to bring it back if we have to.
I think I agree.
And
with
it's
you.
2 years, we're talking, 18, 19.
I really don't like school starting before Labor Day, but, I mean, I'm keeping my own personal opinion out of it. I think it should start after Labor Day, but it is what it is. I understand the teacher's contract, and I want to be respectful of that. I'm sort of old-fashioned. I don't think school should start until after Labor Day. But I'm comfortable voting on what we have too. So, are we good on that now?
That sounds good.
We made the motion, so we ready to vote? All those in favor? Thank you, and I need a motion to.
So move.
Adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, thank you. Second, all those in favor? Okay. Diane, do you mind just yanking the audio over there on your side?
I did. I thought.
Thank you.